What is happening out there, Roto Scouts football fans? Welcome to a Saturday afternoon show, gang. We'll see who's out there, who ends up showing up live, who ends up catching up later. A lot going on right now. 5:30, not an ideal start time with a 7:30 basketball slate coming up. It's the best I could manage as far as finding a landing spot for this. We're going to go kind of like we did last week. We'll go like 2 hours. Maybe not the most detailed show we've ever done as far as peeling back the bench guys who play 3 snaps and talking about them at length. Maybe we don't need to go quite that far into it this week, so we'll try and keep it a little bit more surface level, and then if you want to catch up on more detailed takes, I'm going to finish up the game notes for every single game overnight tonight. So far, only the first 2 games were written up super late last night, and then ended up crashing out. I wrote out the full Optimizer Groups article, did all the groups, laid everything out, etc., updated all the stats. But once I got to note writing time, I only had a couple hours in me, and that got me through 2 games. So we'll get the rest of that taken care of tonight. That'll be up for the morning. And as usual, if you're up, you can follow along with me as I'm writing those. If you reload the page every 20, 25 minutes or so, you'll get another team. It's about how long it takes me to get through each one. And then there's breaks layered in there and everything, of course. Maybe it's more like a half hour. But make sure that you're checking out that groups article. I might end up opening that one up just so the people who are paying members know. Just going to put the word out there. I might in the morning, like tomorrow at like 11, right? And you guys know how long that article is, so you really want to spend some time with it. So I might do like last minute, like, hey, we just opened this up. Come check it out if you need some last minute, blah, 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 blah. Little promotion kind of a thing. But hopefully the people who are behind the paywall already, who I greatly appreciate and whose feedback I'm very interested in on this sort of thing. Hopefully you guys get that. You don't mind. At some point, we'll run some promo codes and all of that good stuff. But if you're not familiar, if you're new here out of the 8-9 people that are here so far, check out rotoscouts.com. Access to all of the football projections, all the rankings we're going to talk about for these different teams. That groups article, it's got tons and tons of content in it. Access to NBA projections and NHL projections on top of that. All in price under $1 a day, weekly, monthly, and quarterly plans. So let's dive in. Hey, Steven, what's going on, buddy? Steven Leibowitz, a regular. The top end of regulars, I gotta say. I mean, who's here more often than Steven? And Steven was a regular at other shows, at other places. The dude is just one of the rock-solid people in the industry. Always good to see you, Steven. I know it's a interesting week. I was telling my friends I made one tragic laundry mistake last week. I'm the kind of guy, single guy, bachelor, whatever you want to call me, slob, lazy, doesn't really care about stuff like making sure there's a bunch of clean laundry. So I usually take it down to the bleeding edge, right? Thinking about like, all right, there's like 9 shirts left in that pile. That gets me to next weekend. Maybe I'll do some laundry then. So last weekend I made the tragic mistake, and maybe if you've watched every show this week, you've noticed I've worn quite a few Giants shirts, and they're all blue. I was like, yeah, I'll want to wear 6 blue shirts next week. Nope. So that was fun. But anyway, we're going to talk about some football. Let's get into some football before I start saying stupid things. It's an interesting board. 10 games on DraftKings, 11 games including the nightcap on FanDuel. A little bit shorter of a slate than we've been dealing with over the last couple of weeks. I'm just going to do the Vegas stuff, just scrolling down right here. It's just easier. I have it loaded up, but this always trips me up because I have it game. Oh, actually, no, it's the other board that trips me up. The board in the projections file, when I built it, I did it with favorite instead of just the home team as the spread there, and it trips me up when I try and use that to talk about it, but this one I can do. Pittsburgh at Washington, 45.5 point total in that one. Definitely upside pieces from Washington. They've been one of the highest scoring teams in the sport throughout the beginning part of the season here, over the first half of the season now. Top end quarterback with the rookie. Kind of wish we had him wearing some blue this season. Screwed that up. Had to make sure that we got those Tommy DeVito memes last year. Pittsburgh side, you've got some okay pieces among the skill players. You've got Russ at the helm now. They're all right. At worst, I think Pittsburgh hangs with Washington because Washington's not that great defensively. Definitely going to allow Russ to throw the ball a little bit to Pickens, to Freiermuth, guys like that, Calvin Austin. So a little bit of upside on the Pittsburgh side, but I'm probably more interested in them as bring back plays against the Washington side. San Fran potentially getting a couple major pieces back. Christian McCaffrey seems like all signs point toward yes. Debo a little bit more shaky, but he's questionable. He practiced in a limited sense. Got to watch both of those statuses. They're also getting Juwan Jennings back this week, which is another high-end performer at the wide receiver position. He's presumably going to step into the 2. It'll be interesting to see him and Ricky Pearsall battle, 2-3, who's the next man up after Debo, who's filling that Ayuk role more. I expect Jennings to be the guy who gets that shot. So real interesting pieces there. And then we know that the Tampa side is just kind of crippled with the top 2 receivers out, but they're still effective. Baker's still a high-end quarterback who is honestly somewhat affordable here in a 50.5 point game that is the top game on the slate. He's got 2 capable running backs who are operators in the pass game all the time. He's got a decent tight end to work with. And then the Sterling Shepherds of the world, we'll see if Jalen McMillan plays and some other guys in that passing attack. It's not ideal. It's not what this game would have been if Evans and Godwin were healthy. But I think we can maybe at least mine for cheap parts from Tampa Bay at worst. I'm not sure we stack it, though. Denver at KC, kind of a low-end one there, 41.5 point total. The KC side will give us the obvious names and options to work with. Denver was good defensively against some bad teams early on. It's just kind of middle of the road, I think. The numbers look better than I think that defense truly is. KC favored by 8 in a 41.5 point total. Not great, but maybe we could get away with a skill player or 2 on the KC side of things. Atlanta, New Orleans, 46.5 point total here. This is one of the 2 games I started to write up yesterday. I think it was this one and the next one. 2 really solid totals, 4 really good teams in these 2 games. I actually like both these games a lot. But this one specifically, Atlanta and New Orleans, between Alvin Kamara with expectations of 25 plus touches again, with just missing pieces galore for New Orleans, and then Bijan Robinson against a pretty gettable New Orleans rush defense, I really like a top-end running back to come out of this game. No promises about which guy it's going to be, but we'll see in a second. Those guys are 1-2 across sites for both points and value. So definitely some high-end running back options there. And then New Orleans passing game kind of decimated. Atlanta side pretty much intact and functional. Atlanta's favored by 4 on the road. It's an interesting slate. Look at all the home dogs we've got for one thing. A lot of home dogs, a lot of relatively large point spreads, several clunker totals. So we got to get into, in my opinion, these 2 games. That 50.5 point game, definitely at least on the San Fran side, and then probably this one at least on the Washington side. Because we've got a couple 39ers down here, and then on FanDuel, of course, we get the benefit of that 49 point game late in the night. Buffalo and Indy's going to be interesting. Definitely high-end skill players on both sides. Comes down to really, in my opinion, what Flacco does. I know he was really good in one game. He was okay in a couple other ones, but it's been a little bit up and down. But if he's hitting, if he's finding those receivers, and he really let us down in that role last week in that Minnesota Indy game. But I think we kind of go back to that same expectations. He's got good options to work with. There's no Pittman this week, so it's a little bit more concentrated for Indy. But you do have Downs, who seems to be a favored target for Flacco already anyway. Enhances the upside for Pierce, and then you get down board with like Adonai Mitchell and Ashton Doolin and guys like that. New England Chicago looks like a really low-end game to me. Maybe you can get away with some Caleb +1 type stacks. I really don't like anything coming out of the New England side unless it's maybe named Ramondre Stevenson. Maybe you could get away with a little bit of him, but that's an ugly game. As good as Chicago's skill players are, I think they're probably better as like standalone one-off types. In that role, they're fine. You want to grab a little DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, Cole Kmet at the tight end position. I'm not a huge Swift guy. DeAndre, not Taylor. I would never badmouth Taylor where people can hear me on the internet. Although I guess she's probably in some trouble these days too. But anyway. So New England, Chicago, just not a big fan of that game in general. Minnesota, Jacksonville could get interesting. Trevor Lawrence doesn't look like he's going to play. Still questionable, but all signs are trending in the wrong direction. So you get Mac Jones on the Jacksonville side, which is less than ideal. Minnesota, obviously some premium weapons. They were on the other side of that kind of letdown late night game last week that really thought was going to make my week. But definitely willing to go back to the well with that one. Couple high-end receivers, a very high-end running back, very good passing game. So I don't mind that one. Just a 43-point total. Jags 7-point dogs at home isn't great, though, as far as the game environment overall. Maybe it's a better spot where it's just standalone Jones in some lineups, standalone Jefferson, standalone Addison. Tennessee and the Chargers, who I almost just called the Clippers because my mind is still on the NBA. 3-game NBA slate going off in an hour and 45 minutes. If you're in the chat, by the way, do me the favor. If things break in the NBA, most notably Zach LaVine or Emmanuel Quickley news, please let me know just so that I can handle it real quick. Right now, we got both of those guys in. They're both questionable. It's only a 3-gamer. Shouldn't trip us up too much as far as this show goes. But I'd like to handle that as quickly as possible. So just shout it out if you see it. So Tennessee and the Chargers, maybe we're looking at some defenses there. Maybe we get to some running backs. Maybe we get to some upside in some cheap pass catchers. There were a couple guys who rate out okay on the Chargers side of that one. Just don't really love the game environment, but the Chargers pretty heavily favored, 7.5-point favorites in a home game at 39-point total. Tennessee side is a lot weaker. Will Levis stepping up at quarterback again. Not much to love on the Tennessee side, if we're being perfectly honest. It's mostly about the Chargers, low-end total, kind of a low-end team to get over the top about, but maybe just as standalone guys and pieces. Jets in Arizona, that's an interesting total and a very close point spread. Just a 1-point spread, 47-point total in that one. We're definitely going to, if you run lineups, if you run sims, you're going to see pieces from the Jets. They've got too many skill players to not come up at least a little bit. You've got good skill players, primarily the running back, the top-end receiver on the Arizona side. We could maybe dabble with some Arizona stacks. Kyler Murray, not crazy expensive. Harrison, not expensive and commensurate with his skill level. The output has come and gone somewhat this season so far, but the price is reasonable for the amount of skill and the ceiling that you could potentially buy there. I think it's more leaning into the Jets side, though, despite it being a close game. I like the idea of it being a close game. Keeping it competitive all the way to the final whistle would be great. But it's probably more around, Rodgers +2 with the big receivers. Definitely a lot to work with and a lot of different ways to build with the Jets. So they're going to be an interesting team. Philly, just undeniably, they math out by raw point totals once again to the top end spot on the board because I'm adding up and averaging scores for 4 guys, and they've got 4 guys who are typically among the top 10, 12 guys at their positions, and 3 out of those 4 are among like the top 5 guys at their position every week. So they just always hit the top or toward the top of the board for raw points. But if you look at the stack by points per dollar, they were, I believe, 10 and 12 across sites in the rankings. We'll see that in a sec. Definitely an appealing enough game environment there. They are more than capable of smoking Dallas. They're favored by 7.5 in Dallas against a pretty inept defense so far this year. 43.5-point total. No Dak Prescott. He's going to be out the rest of the season. It's Cooper Rush taking over for the Dallas side. So the upside for that game probably going to come down to, not the upside for the game necessarily, but is it a stack or is it a one-off spot? Probably comes down to the play of the Dallas quarterback. If he doesn't hold his own, then they're not going to really need to hit the gas on the Philly side. So you get, maybe a bump for Saquon in the second half. You get maybe a big performance from one of the receivers, but not all 3 of those players. So that's where the variance for like quality of stack versus quality of individual kind of might come from in that game. And then wrapping things on FanDuel, a 49-point total, aggressively high total there between Detroit and Houston. Detroit, one of the top teams in the league in terms of scoring. Very interesting game on their side of things. Getting Jameson Williams back into the fold should help on the Detroit side. The 2-headed running back situation. I like all things Detroit in that one. A little bit more limited on the Houston side just through injuries. We've got Tank Dell's questionable now coming into this one. Nico Collins is trying to fight his way back for this. I haven't added him back to the projections yet. He's been really limited in practice, but he's technically questionable. Keeping an eye on it. Definitely would be a big get for Houston to have him back, especially if Tank can play. But that could be a even more limited version of Houston. So 2 different ways that Houston could go kind of Schrodinger's DFS play right now. So keep an eye on that one. Tread lightly, the Swifties will hear you anywhere. Yeah, hey man. I don't know that I could pick one of her songs if they would just played me like 5 pop songs and asked me which one was hers. Even if they were they could all 5 have been hers. I probably wouldn't get it right. But I appreciate her. She seems fine. And I certainly don't want any trouble. Plus, my niece is 9, so we're like trending in toward that direction, so I got to be aware of these things. So let's dive on in. As usual, just kind of going top to bottom alphabetically by the games here. So you can see what I was talking about, this very interesting one. This one's already written up on the site. Steven's at home right now rocking out to some Taylor Swift. Shake it off. Nope. Maybe if I heard it, I would know it, but certainly not by song title. So you can see what I was talking about. Bijan with a bullet. RB2 by points, RB1 by value on DraftKings, 2-2 across the FanDuel slate. And then on the other side of the same game, Mr. Kamara with ridiculous expectations for volume. I mean, look who Derek Carr is going to be throwing the ball to. The 2 tight ends are the highest projected pass catchers right now, not named Alvin Kamara. They were dealing with Mason Tipton, Marquez Valdez-Scantling maybe, Jermaine Jackson, Equanimeous St. Brown if he's activated. It is not a good receiving core right now. Olave's out. So very, very limited there. In their last game, Kamara carried the ball. And we talked about him going into that one. This was the matchup against Carolina. Carried the ball 29 times for 155 yards. Added 6 catches on top of that for 60 yards. He's caught at least 6 balls. He's caught exactly 6 balls in the last 3 games. And 4 out of the last 5 games. The 5th game, he caught 5. He is super involved in the passing game. It gets his potential touches into the conservatively 25 range. And as we just saw, I mean, last week he had the 29 carries and then the 6 catches that he had. So 35 actual touches. The 6 catches came on 9 targets. So we're talking about 35 touches on 38 potential touches. It's ridiculous for a running back. Nobody's got volume like Kamara, and we know what Kamara can do with touches. Turned it into 200-plus scrimmage yards the other day. Didn't score, which is definitely a detriment when you're touching the ball that much, but he should come right back to that kind of potential. So I love the upside there. He's going up against an Atlanta rush defense that's allowing 4.6 yards per rush attempt, ranks 21st. They're only allowing 0.6 rushing touchdowns per game, which could be that limiting factor on top. But given that he's also going to be probably their most targeted receiver, I just think he overcomes as the thing goes on. Atlanta's been good against the pass, though. 6.3 yards per pass attempt does rank 3rd. But they don't really get to the quarterback that much. 2.74% sack rate. Ranks 32nd. 2.19% interception rate. You can see their sacks and their interceptions over here almost even. That shouldn't be the case. So they're just kind of a moderate defense. They're allowing 24 points a game. There's more than enough scoring. It's just when they do allow touchdowns, it's come a little bit more through the air. But again, there's nothing stopping Kamara from being that guy through the air. For the season, we're talking about 4.4 yards per rush attempt on 16.7 per game. You get 4.7 per rush attempt out of Bijan on the other side. He's carrying the ball 15 times a game. Doesn't see quite the volume that Kamara does, but who does? But the 4.7 targets per game that Bijan's getting, with upside to last time out he had 7. So reasonable upside into the low 20s for touches for him as well. He's one of the higher-end potential touch running backs in football. He's going up against a rush defense that's allowing 5.1 yards per rush attempt, ranks 30th in football. This is not a good Saints defense. 25.4 points per game allowed, ranks 25th. 7.5 yards per pass attempt, ranks 22nd. A low-end sack rate, 5.86% sack rate, 3.61% interception rate is good. That's all they've really done well is these 11 picks. So it's a pretty non-threatening defense and one that Bijan should easily be able to gouge. What I don't love is that they're both in the same game. I don't really like having both running backs on opposing sides of the game, because if these guys take an 8-minute drive down the field and he chews up a ton of carries and a ton of clock and then scores, it limits the amount of plays available on this side. And if that happens a couple times with each running back, you're getting somewhat of the way there. But in a lot of ways, even a running back does need to have parts of the game accelerated via the passing game and get efficient about scoring in order to truly hit ceiling. So to get two ceiling running backs out of the same game on opposing sides does become a little bit of a challenge, but these guys have enough volume to make it very, very believable in this situation. So love the running backs in this one. Enthused about the passing attack on the Atlanta side, given the low-end pass defense that we're getting out of New Orleans. As long as Kirk Cousins can avoid trouble in terms of the interceptions, I think we're okay there. He's got a very good connection with Drake London and with Darnell Mooney. He's got a very solid tight end in Kyle Pitts. He's got a reasonable third man in Ray McLeod, who can make some big plays on short yardage plays. Cousins has thrown 17 touchdowns against 7 interceptions on the season, 7.9 yards per attempt on 32 attempts per game. Not bad at all in terms of the volume, not bad at all in terms of the touchdown-interception ratio. He's got Darnell Mooney operating a little further downfield than Drake London. London's outscored Mooney by 1, but that's 11 touchdowns between those two receivers. Pretty significant scoring. 70% of the air yards going to those two guys. Another 15 goes toward Kyle Pitts. And then Ray picks up a little bit. He's got 15 there, but on a shorter average depth of target. 6.9 yards per target for Ray McLeod on 5 targets a game. He's only scored once. He's gained 6.8 yards per target, so he's getting not making too many big explosive plays, but that's what they're looking for out of Ray. That and just, standard work over the middle, getting some first downs, et cetera, marching down the field. But if he's going to really go off for DFS, he needs to catch that ball on short yardage, make a move, break a big play, and that's really where you get the big upside out of him. But he's not bad as far as the volume goes with 5 targets a game. He can dip down to the 2-3 range, but he's not a bad option. Cousins has been over 300 yards once. Yeah, once this season. That was the monster 509-yard game, Week 5 against Tampa Bay. Had 4 touchdowns in that one, then 4 touchdowns in the next game against Tampa Bay in Week 8. Came off of that one last week against Dallas, though, threw 3 more touchdown passes, 222 yards on 19 of 24. You can get that kind of an effective day out of Cousins, no problem. And that's enough upside to feed both receivers. So Cousins, +1 with the running back. And any one of, honestly, these 3 or McLeod, perfectly viable. There's a lot of volume going through all those players. And then, of course, any combination Cousins with any of the just, receivers tight end in a +2 is totally fine. I don't mind him in a thin stack. Cousins London on their own, Cousins Mooney on their own. Those guys are getting plenty of targets, 7.8, 7.6 apiece. Again, slightly further down the field for Mooney, but a 10-yard A-dot basically for Drake London. Plenty of air yards for him, plenty of big playability, plenty of scoring upside. You do have Tyler Algier here. He's a threat all the time to poach potential touchdown from Bijan. He should definitely benefit from facing a bad rush defense too. He's never a bad lotto ticket running back. I tend to take lotto ticket dart throw type plays with more pass catchers where, 130-yard touchdown pass and you're gold with a cheap receiver, where a guy like Algier still needs to get his 8 carries like you see there, 8.2 carries a game. Grind out his 5 yards per rush attempt, give me my 40 yards and poach a touchdown. That happens over the course of the game rather than over one big play most of the time. But Algier is a very, very capable running back. He popped up for 18 carries back in Week 6, gained 105 yards and scored a touchdown. He dipped to just 33 yards on 12 attempts in Week 8. Picked up 6 carries in Week 9 just last week. Gained just 18 yards, but scored his second rushing touchdown of the year. He's an involved player, and he's got explosive big play ability, and he's got the ability to burst through the line if they get it in close. He's carried the ball a significant number of times in the red zone for them this season. Twice last week, once the week before that. 8 times in that big carry game. That doesn't necessarily count, but had carried the ball 7 times over the 5 weeks before that one in the red zone. So a not insignificant piece, not a guy to get crazy carried away with, but if you need to dip on salary and get a guy who's a total differentiation piece there, not a bad option. Probably better as a standalone than building into your Atlanta stacks because there's not much correlation in the passing game. But as a cheapo standalone guy with some touchdown equity, I don't mind Algier. Everybody else on that side, total dart throw. Hodge has 1 touchdown, but is barely ever targeted. There's nothing else down there as far as volume goes. And then everything outside of Kamara on the New Orleans side is honestly pretty much a dart throw. I do think you can mix and match your way through the tight end shares. Taysom Hill, Juwan Johnson, 2 to 3 targets a game each. Johnson, Drew just... Wait, I thought he had more than 2 last week. Wait a minute. Let me scroll. It was 4 o'clock in the morning, but I thought he had... No, it was only 2. 2 catches for 41 yards on 2 targets last week. He had spiked up the 2 weeks prior to that, 6 targets and 4 targets. Caught 3 balls each of 3 weeks going into last week's game. It's just been kind of limited by volume overall this season. It started to trend in the right direction, but he's not the tight end, the receiving tight end that he was last year. Taysom Hill, just mix and match quality, in my opinion. 2.4 targets a game. No receiving touchdowns, but he does have the 3 rushing touchdowns, which is kind of a, just odd expectation, but he only carries the ball 4.6 times per game. He probably will get the backup rushing touchdowns in this configuration of the touches rather, in this configuration of the offense. He probably is the next most playable guy after Kamara. But he really honestly doesn't represent all that much more than kind of still a gadget player, just with a slightly bigger upside if he gets those touches. Tipton's fine as a dart throw for cheap, 45-57, but he's not going to grade out well. He's only seen 2.8 targets a game, but he does have a decent downfield ADOT on those limited targets, 12.8 yard ADOT so far. MVS, if he's out there, 14.5 yard ADOT on extremely limited volume so far. Those guys don't rank out exactly great. 40s, 50s, and beyond. Jermaine doesn't have he got tossed in here on an update. I didn't update the rankings after that one. So if you see any zeros or anything that looks weird in the rankings, it's probably why. Overall, Falcons stack 5 by points on DraftKings, 8 by value, 5 and 6 by points and value on FanDuel. The Saints, they're 15th ranked by raw points, but they are 5 by points per dollar. It's just, that's almost exclusively being driven, I think, by Alvin Kamara's 23-point projection at 8,100. If you take that away, there's really not that much to like about this stack. So don't get completely deceived by that good-looking points per dollar rank. It's more that Kamara looks really good. 17-14 as a stack for New Orleans on FanDuel. Kamara has plenty of individual value, but it doesn't bounce in the stack quite the same way because you do have, Taysom Hill, Juwan Johnson are cheap individually as well. That helps the overall salary of that stack. So just watch what you're doing there. Top end potential bonus guy has to be Alvin Kamara on the volume. But Bijan, not a bad second option. Honestly, Drake London, not even far off either. Hopefully you guys are doing well out there. Panji, thank you, buddy. Levine available to play. Excellent. Means no changes necessary. Let me just throw a note up into the, notes. Andrew Nemhard questionable tomorrow. That dick. He was in a handful of my lineups yesterday that scratched after lock. Oh, the other one that killed me yesterday. Hopefully you guys didn't pivot from Keta to Tillman at the end. I pivoted 3/4 of my Keta shares to Tillman, just saying all right, that'll save me some salary and then I can upgrade other spots, which I did. But then Tillman went out and put up a 0 and Keta had his, 25, 26 point game that I projected. So just pissed me off. Is active. All right. Just update this real quick. That is 6 o'clock on the nose. Perfect. All right, second game up, Buffalo and Indy. I referred to this one before as well. This one's also written up on the site. 46.5 point total here too. This one in that first game, definitely appealing totals-wise. 4-point spread in Buffalo's favor on the road in Indy. Definitely pieces to work with, though. Again, I think the entire thing's going to swing on whether or not Flacco plays well, which is not the craziest statement. The hometown quarterback has to play well. But I do think that's realistic. If Indy doesn't hang with Buffalo's absurdly efficient scoring attack, this could be one where it's 2 scores early, get grindy, and then score a couple times late for Buffalo and just sock the game away like they have a habit of doing. The Bills, are 4th in the league in points, 28.9 per game, 3rd in touchdowns with 3.4 per game, and last in the league in number of plays per game. They just play a super, super efficient high-end offense. Amari Cooper's questionable for this one. Could lead to Khalil Shakir standing a little bit taller. Cooper didn't play last week, had a wrist injury, practiced through the week on a limited basis last week, then didn't play Sunday, practiced through the week this week, still questionable going into today. So we'll see what we get out of him. He's obviously still high-end if we do get him active. In his first game with the Bills, 5 targets, caught 4 of them for 66 yards and had a touchdown. What I like about that, though, was that it kind of enhanced rather than detracted from Khalil Shakir. Over the last couple weeks, he had 7 catches for 65 yards in that game on 7 targets. He had 9 catches for 107 on 10 targets in week 8. Cooper was out there for just 35 snaps in that one. He ran 24 routes, was targeted twice, and then out. But a significant upside game for Shakir there. Just happened to not score, but a lot of catches, a lot of targets. And then 6 catches on 7 targets for 50 yards last week. He's a significant piece for them. I drafted Khalil Shakir in a number of leagues this year. I liked him coming in. He's a very good receiver in terms of catching what's thrown to him. And I know that sounds silly, but if you look, like, Cooper's off because because of who was throwing him the ball earlier in the season. But just look at Shakir on his own. 5.6 targets per game on average, catches 5.3 of them. It's a very, very high ratio of catches to targets, and it has been over the last couple of seasons. He's excellent at that. He's got very, very good hands. So when you target him, you're typically picking up yardage, and that's what he's been throughout the season. He's only been in the end zone twice. The scoring potential can be limited, but if Cooper's not out there, it does enhance his touchdown scoring potential. Really like his points per dollar on FanDuel. Khalil Shakir's 15th by points, 7th by points per dollar on the FanDuel slate, where he's only 62. That works well in stacks. That works well out of stacks as an individual. On DraftKings, he's very good. 18-15 is by no means unplayable. That's appealing. It's just not quite the value level that one's at. Cooper looks really good. He looks better for value on DraftKings. 15-10 on the DraftKings slate, where he's 17-16 on FanDuel. Obviously, just need him to suit up. Dalton Kincaid, a high-end option at tight end position. 5th by points on both sides, but number 1 by value because he's only $4,900. He's been cheap. Really reduced pricing. Scored a touchdown 2 weeks ago. 4 catches on 7 targets, 31 yards and a TD. Was targeted 10 times last week. Again, was very, very cheap as a upside play last week. 10 targets. He only turned it into 4 catches and 32 yards and didn't score. But if you give me that player again with 10 targets guaranteed for that price, I would play him in a significant number of lineups. Targeted twice in the red zone in that. He's been targeted 5 times in the red zone over their last 3 games. He's got 1 touchdown to show for it. But that's significant targeting. Meaningful targeting. So, love the upside with Kincaid. And they're working with one of the best in the business as far as who's throwing them the ball. Again, here's some of the efficiency. Just 29 pass attempts per game for Josh Allen. But he's one of the highest scoring fantasy quarterbacks. He's thrown 17 touchdown passes against just 2 interceptions. 7.6 yards per pass attempt on 7.8 intended air yards per attempt. 222 yards a game. And capable of more when they need it. Major upside quarterback. Allen plus Cooper, Allen plus Shakir with the tight end. Honestly, with a little bit of involvement in the passing game. James Cook is not a bad one to pad in there either because he's got both direct and indirect correlation. Nearly 3 targets a game, but can spike up to a 6-target game like he did last week. Catches just a couple of them. Doesn't really produce a ton, 7.7 yards per target, but he's been in the end zone. And he's a very involved touchdown scorer. 7 scores on the season in the rushing game. That's despite just carrying the ball 13.6 times per game. Gains 4.6 yards per attempt. He's a very talented runner. 7,000, 7,800. As a piece in stacks, I think he's functional. Probably better as a standalone. He's RB8 across DraftKings in both categories. 11 by points, 8 by value on FanDuel. That's a very playable running back. Again, when we're drawing 2 at the position or 3, guys who rank 8, 11 into the teens, definitely playable. Bills defense, I'm not totally wild about it. I think Indy maybe is able to hang here a little bit. You've got the primo running back in Jonathan Taylor. He ranks out very well on his own. I think he's a good standalone option. Buffalo's rush defense has not been stellar. 4.8 yards allowed per rush attempt. That ranks 26th. Their pass defense has been a lot better. 6.6 yards per pass attempt ranks 8th. So if I'm drawing somebody from the Indy side, maybe I'm getting to some Jonathan Taylor shares. Not the craziest thing in the world to envision some success there. 5 touchdowns on the season, 4.8 yards per rush attempt, heavy volume. We're talking about almost 20 potential touches here. For Flacco's part, he ranks okay. Most strongly by value on DraftKings because he's only 5,500 over there. And then if you're considering taking him for a value ride there, and then you've got extremely cheap receiving options with a little bit of somewhat realistic expectation for projections, I don't think it's completely bananas to consider Indy as a viable value stack. They rank 9th by points overall, but 4th by points per dollar on DraftKings. 10th and 9th on FanDuel. It's a totally different story on the FanDuel slate because that's a different price for Joe Flacco. When you combine his 55 with, say, Adonai Mitchell, even if I've got Mitchell a little bit high and he doesn't see the target volume that I'm expecting, he's got some downfield ability and he should be out there to see some targets. Right now, the way I've got him projected for just 3,400, he ranks as wide receiver 3 by points per dollar. I wouldn't be quite that enthusiastic about him, but as wide receiver 30 by just raw points, maybe the truth is somewhere in between those numbers. Definitely a playable option. I like Josh Downs way better. I also like Alec Pierce a little bit better just because I've got a little bit more faith in the reality of Pierce's targeting. But we are talking about 3.6 versus 3.7 per game overall when you really get down to it. Mitchell was targeted just once last week. That's the downside for you. That was on 4 routes run over 5 snaps. He ran 9 routes the week before that on 13 snaps, but was targeted 4 times. 9 routes the week before, 3 targets, 10, 4, 12, 7. So we're not talking about a super high number of snaps, but when he's out there, he is a route runner and he is a guy that does pick up some targets. With no Pittman out there, presumably that's the guy who's going to step up a little bit more into at least some snaps, at least some opportunities. Pierce is just more a low volume target, get out there, get open down the field, and let us try and hit you for a monster play. And he's definitely succeeded in that department a couple times this season. Did so with Flacco. Did so a couple times early in the season with Richardson. It's calmed down over the last 4 games pretty significantly. He caught 3 balls for 41 yards last week. That was on 3 targets. Just 11 yards, 15 yards, 0 for 0 yards the week before, the 3 weeks prior. Got to go back to week 5 for his last big game. He caught 3 passes for 134 and a touchdown in that one. Has not caught more than 5 balls in a game. That was week 2, 56 yards and a TD. 3 catches, 125 and a TD in week 1. What he is very capable of, though, he's got 5 40-yard plus catches on the season. It's a significant downfield threat. If you're looking for a big play, a tournament play, he's the definition of a tournament play. 22.3 yard ADOT. So on average, they're targeting him 22 yards down the field. 3 touchdowns on the season. I just laid them out for you. It's not a safety play by any means. But I've been using Pierce throughout the season, and we've been rewarded for it a couple of times. That's all you really need. So for Flacco's part, the numbers are skewed here by some non-starts, so ignore the averages. 7 touchdowns is correct. 2 interceptions is correct. 298 yards per game is not correct. I didn't catch that those were dividing against non-starts. Hold on one second. Yeah, 359 yards in that week 5 game that I referred to earlier. That was on 33 of 44 passing, 75%, 3 touchdowns with that. 168 yards and 2 touchdown passes in his first appearance, 189 yards and 2 touchdowns with an interception in week 6. Didn't play week 7, 1 snap in week 8, 49 snaps last week in a start. Completed 16 of 27, 179 yards, no touchdown, 1 interception. That's your downside. You can get the big game out of Flacco. I don't doubt him. I think the talent is still, mostly intact. He's got decent receivers to work with. A couple of good downfield targets. Mitchell, no slouch getting down the field, 15.9 yard ADOT in his volume so far this season. Doolin also works way down the field. He's probably going to step into Mitchell's typical role. 8, 10 snaps, 4 targets, something like that, but might get a shot down the field. What I hate with the Colts is this multi-headed tight end situation. Kylan Granson, Mo Alley Cox, Drew Ogletree, guess where the touchdown's going and play that guy. I don't like either of them. I don't like either of them, and I don't like him either. They all just play. Low between the 3 was 44% of the snaps last week, up to 59%. All 3 guys played more than 44% of the snaps. On average, 36, 45, and 35. As far as the targeting, sub 2 targets per game for each guy, with Mo Alley Cox leading the way with 1.4. He's also got a touchdown on the board, but so does Drew Ogletree. It's just a messy, ugly tight end situation, but any one of those guys could end up picking up a touchdown grab because they'll look those ways occasionally when they're in the red zone. So again, Indy, solid looking value stack, decent enough for points. Good standalone play there. Decent enough standalone plays in Josh Downs and Alec Pierce. I don't know that I would standalone Adonai Mitchell. Downs and Pierce I'd be more likely to. Any one of those guys, good bring back play on a Buffalo stack as well. With Buffalo ranking out very strong for points, very strong on FanDuel for value, given the value that we're getting out of Khalil Shakir over there, as well as James Cook, I gotta say. Definitely interesting to go like Allen +2 with a bring back. Don't mind that. On DraftKings, with them falling to 11th by points per dollar, it's a little bit less appealing for that construction, but still a very high-end play as far as just the raw scoring potential. And again, if Flacco hangs, if Indy's in this game, this could go north of 50 easily. So don't mind this one at all. Most likely bonus guy, Jonathan Taylor. This game I'm not wild about. Yeah, Stephen Levine was not a change. I had him in all day. So I just noted it on the site, and we went forward. So the only other one that could trip us up is if IQ doesn't play. It's just a matter of pulling him and reverting the minutes to what they have been. He thinks highly of you. Did I say I hate somebody? That was always my dad's line. I hate this. They think very highly of you. Power asks, if you had 4 players to choose with 2 touchdown upside, who would they be? And thank you in advance. Alvin Kamara. Either, depending on how you want it positionally, Jalen Hurts or Saquon Barkley, I think would be very interesting as far as just 2 touchdown upside. And just, if I'm picking from the entire slate. I mean, we could get into Let's see. There it is. I guess correctly with those three. McCaffrey, if he plays, I would probably throw into that mix. And it's difficult because, we don't really know what the condition's going to look like. But it would be difficult to deny him from that list. But you could put him on the list and consider him questionable, I guess. What are my other big? So in terms of how they project out statistically, Jalen and Saquon were the correct answers there. And they actually project combined for more than 2 rushing touchdowns. But that's not necessarily individually. You have to parse it in your head, who you think's going to get what. And then on the receiving side, where's that big one? That's just Brown. Watch. Let's see. That's an interesting one. I'll throw... now it's on the FanDuel slate only. I was going to say Amon-Ra has the highest potential receiving touchdown. It's sub 1, but I would make him probably my answer there, but he's not on your slate. Debo, I question, but would have that. AJ would also have that, but I don't necessarily want to give you a third Eagle to work with. But that's what I'm talking about when I say how the Eagles just naturally project up high. Both A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith kind of qualify for that with like a half a projected touchdown apiece. It's just a lot right now going into the Eagles in San Francisco as far as these projected touchdowns, honestly. Justin Jefferson, it's a kind of silly, just I'm giving you a list of star caliber players. Maybe a sneakier one, either Aaron Jones or Breece Hall. Neither of those guys is actually sneaky, but they're not maybe quite the top of mind superstars that maybe some of those other guys were. So, it's the best I can answer that one. In a way that's just like, who are the top projected guys in the slate? But I do get what you're going for. As we talk it through, if we come up with some other guys spring to mind, we'll put them on that list. How about that? Like, I would never call somebody crazy if they told me they had Travis Kelce on a potential 2-touchdown list. That's not batty. He happens to rank as tight end 1 by points on both sides, so that's helpful. Tight end 2 by value on DraftKings, 1 by value on FanDuel. The Chiefs in general, stack 7 by points, 6 by value on DraftKings, 9 and 7 on FanDuel. My real concern here is, does Denver hang offensively? I haven't been the biggest Bo Nix fan. He's padded his scoring with some rushing touchdowns. He's only thrown 8 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. Just gaining 6 yards per pass attempt despite an 8.1 yard intended air yards per attempt. He's put the ball in the end zone 4 times on the ground. So again, we've got 12 total touchdowns out of the individual. It's helped a little bit, but I don't love their ability to stay in this game. I do like the developing connection that he's got with Courtland Sutton. Sutton's been a frustrating member of my bench on my season-long team the last few weeks. 10 targets last week. He's averaging 7.5. He's only averaging 4 catches a game despite the 7.5 targets a game. Some of that not his fault with some erratic throws. But he's by far the team's air yards leader. 39.3% of the air yards going Courtland Sutton's direction on a 13.4 yard ADOT. That's the volume and the average depth combined up to make that air yards number. 2 touchdown receptions on this season. 1 has gone to Troy Franklin. He's got 15% of the air yards on a similar 13.5 yard average depth, but only 3.4 targets per game going Franklin's direction. Devon Villay operates a lot shorter than that, tries to make things happen with the ball in his hands, 4.6 targets a game on just a 7.3 yard ADOT, 7.19% of the air yards, has not made a big play to score a touchdown this season. Just a mix and match quality kind of a guy with some talent, maybe an underlying explosive play waiting to happen, but not really a big paramount piece of this slate. Marvin Mims as a dart throw, 1.7 targets per game on a 16.3 yard ADOT. One of these days they'll connect for a big touchdown pass. It won't be highly owned. It's not a very likely play. Not looking like very much at all. Lil Jordan drawing a couple more targets on a shorter ADOT, also has not scored. This is not a good passing attack. None of those receivers really rank out all that well. Mid-40s, 50s, topping out. Sutton is the top end guy. He does rank 9th by value on DraftKings, but 17th by raw points, 18-14 on FanDuel. So I guess PPR site, maybe I get to some Sutton. He's only 5,600. It's probably not in stacks. It's probably more as a standalone or maybe as a bring back play to Kansas City. And you can see where they rank as a stack, 18, 15, 20, 16. I know that Bo Nix has been a value quarterback. Don't get me wrong. I had him rated as that 2 weeks ago. He won somebody $1 million. Came back last week. I think he was in some winning lineups last week as a standalone. I get that he's cheap. He ranks decently by value. He's 7,000 on FanDuel. Comes back as QB 14 by points, but 6 by points per dollar. 12th, 10th on the DraftKings slate. A little less impactful value-wise on DraftKings this week. Could come back as a sneaky value there, so I won't begrudge you the Nick-Sutton combo. Beyond that, it starts to, really stretch viability. Nick's just as a standalone quarterback maybe is the approach again. Just pick off the salary at the position. Don't sweat correlation and build big. Javonte Williams is okay. Again, when we're getting 2 or 3 at the position, rankings like those do play. He's cheap enough, 6,000 on both sites, lands 16, 15 across sites by value. I just don't love the talent. I really don't. 11.3 carries per game, 3.8 yards per rush attempt is not at all impressive. 2 rushing touchdowns on the season. He's just lucky that Jaleel McLaughlin's not any better behind him. Audric Estime might, but they're not giving him the carries so far. 3.9 yards per attempt for McLaughlin on 5.9 carries per game. He's got 1 touchdown, 2.1 yards before, 1.8 after, 1.9 in both categories. It's an unimpressive offense in all respects. Little bit of involvement for both guys in the passing game. 1.9 targets for McLaughlin, 4.1 for Javonte Williams. He's the more targeted guy. He's the higher potential touch. But you're talking about, in a sport where we're looking for 20 with guys that we've already talked about on this slate in the 20s and beyond, we're really only talking about 15 potential touches and low-end touches with Javonte Williams. It's not that appealing. Broncos defense outside of maybe some value at 2,400. Maybe you pick off a day where they come up with an interception, maybe create a scoring event, which is obviously the upside that you would need. But maybe they keep this close in a low-scoring contest. Vegas doesn't look like it's running away with the total there at 41.5. It's just that, again, their defense benefited greatly earlier on from playing some pretty lousy teams. You would just need to benefit from Mahomes being a little bit erratic with this receiving core so far. 9 interceptions on the season. It's against just 11 touchdown passes from Mahomes. Nearly 250 yards a game, completing 70% of his passes. Just seems like through part of the season, he's just finding a rhythm with the worthies of the world. They acquired DeAndre Hopkins, which is looking like a big piece for them now, and he ranks out great. It's very straightforward with the Chiefs. The Mahomes plus Kelsey plus Hopkins is easy to build. You can swap Worthy and Hopkins in for one another. It's not a bad option. In their last game, as I scroll to it, Kelsey finally arrived over like the last couple. He had been picking up more targets. Over the first 3-4 weeks of the season, he really wasn't targeted. Then week 4, he had a 9-target total, 10 targets, and caught 9 of them in week 5. Went through all those weeks with no touchdown. Went through the bye week, week 6 with no touchdown. Caught just 4 of 5 for 17 yards against San Fran in week 7 after the bye. Didn't score. And then roared to life. 10 catches, 90 yards, and a touchdown on 12 targets against Vegas in week 8. And caught 14 of 16 for 100 yards in their most recent game against Tampa Bay. So the targets are there. The potential for Kelce to be an absolute beast is there. We've already talked about the upside for Taylor Swift. So, no reason in the world to not consider Kelce at just is Travis Kelce, full stop. Hopkins in that last game, he caught 8 of 9 for 86 yards and 2 touchdowns. Pretty monster performance for him as well. So, considering that was 22 catches and 186 yards across the 2 stars there, I think we kind of like the upside in the Kansas City passing attack again. Denver's been better limiting the run. They rank second against the run in terms of, they rank fifth against the run, 4.0 yards per attempt. Sixth against the pass, 6.5 yards per attempt. But again, a lot of benefit from that came from playing some weekend teams. Like the upside for Kansas City to be able to succeed. Their offense is gaining 7.2 yards per pass attempt. Middle of the pack, 15th. They're scoring 25.4 points a game, 2.9 touchdowns a game. That's 10th and 9th. And again, it just seems like, at least for parts of this season, Kansas City's just been kind of going through the motions, not really taking out more than they need to beat you. Feels like there's always a little bit more to give there. Xavier Worthy, not a bad rotational piece. Definitely worth putting into some lineups. He didn't catch either of his 2 targets last week. Caught 4 for 37 yards on 8 targets the week before and scored a touchdown. A lot of big playability. He carried the ball twice out of the backfield last week for negative 10 yards, though. So I guess not out of the backfield. But was handed the ball in the backfield twice. Does see a few occasional touches. Try and break a big gadget type play. Maxed out at 3 carries back in week 3. He's got 2 rushing touchdowns on the season, though. 140-plus yard play or catch and a pair of 20-plus yard catches. But by all accounts, fastest man in football right now. There's always room for that. Justin Watson just ranks okay, 50, 49, 49, 45 across sites. He caught 3 passes each of the last 2 games. Noah Gray is a mix-and-match second-string tight end. Samaje Perine gets involved a little bit. He did have a touchdown catch last week. 4 catches, 25 yards, and a TD on 5 targets. Mostly involved in short yardage passing situations, third down situations. Not really a go-to, even as a dart throw running back. You need that touchdown game. And even that was 35 yards from scrimmage with a touchdown. That's not necessarily Slate winning. It's just different, right? You got that 8-9 points in a different way than somebody else did with another guy who didn't matter as much. So just a mix and match dart. Mecole Hardman, same deal. 3 catches, 17 yards last week. Has not scored this season. Not a lot down board here. So I think we're just basically working with that group, but that's a pretty terrific group. I skipped over Kareem Hunt, which I should not have done because he's been a touchdown machine. He's the guy I should have picked up when I picked up Carson Steele. Didn't think it was going to work out like this. Hunt has seen 20-plus carries in each of the last 4 games, 27, 22, 21, and 27. The volume is killer. 106 yards last week with a touchdown, 59 and a touchdown, 78 and 2 touchdowns, and 102 and a touchdown in his 4 full appearances. It's been pretty ridiculous. Couple of targets a game as well. Definitely a high-end running back option. I kind of like it better as Mahomes pass catchers or Hunt on his own in other lineups. I don't love Hunt as add him into stacks. He's all right because the volume's there, and there is a little bit of support from the direct correlation. I'll peel that back a little bit, actually. It's just more a matter of wanting to make room for several good pass catchers. But Hunt is playable in stacks. It would be a mistake to say otherwise. So Kansas City, the clear opportunity here. Maybe some Cortland Sutton as a bring-back play as a standalone guy. Maybe a few shares. If you're building 150, throw a couple darts at cheap standalone or Bo Nix +1. It's okay considering the value, but it's low end. DeAndre Hopkins, most likely bonus. This is our FanDuel only game. I'll go through it now, though. High-end game at the end of the night. Love the game environment. If you're on DraftKings, good spot to go grab a beer, roll a joint, hit the like button, whatever it is that you do. Check out rotoscouts.com for access to all these football projections, access to NBA projections for the slate that locks in under an hour from now. Let me make sure we got no news there. Keeping an eye on that for you. Nice, easy little 3-gamer today. Hopefully nothing crazy. Jalen Smith is available. That's good. No change there. Just add a note real quick. Hopefully you guys' weekends are going well. But talking about Roto Scouts, everything at Roto Scouts. All the projections, all the sports, under $1 a day, all in. No per sport pricing. No hidden pricing. No, hey, you built one lineup, but if you want 10, you got to pay us more. None of that. Not that we have a lineup builder right now. But no hidden fees. My thinking is that there's a big population, and all the surveys we ever did at the other place all showed that people out there, by and large, couple of lineups, couple of bucks, diving into the $1, diving into the quarter, diving into the $4, handful of lineups, not looking to spend $200 per sport per month for access to tools they don't need just to get to projections. So we're here under $1 a day, trying to meet the needs of that community of users. If you build 150, if you play $10,000 worth of entries a day, 150 entries in multiple different contests, it'll work just as well for you. But you probably also don't have issues with pricing at other places because you're using it that way. But for the vast majority of people out there looking for just a couple of lineups, a little bit of help, I think under $1 a day is very, very reasonable. Weekly, monthly, and quarterly plans available. Check it out at Roto Scouts. A lot of plugging these days. The other thing I want to tell you guys is let's get that subscription count up. We're just under like 800. I don't know if we're going to make our 1,000 before the new year. We got to hustle. We got to tell some people. Go over to the other place. Mention it in the Discord. I don't give a shit. I don't do that. There's nothing stopping you guys from doing that. Hey, remember Terry? Where'd he go? Oh, well, here he is. That's all. Let him know. I don't care. In fact, I'm encouraging it. I do care. I care in the do it way. CJ Stroud, Jared Goff, couple of pretty high-end quarterbacks. Stroud kind of underperforming my expectations for the season, but does come in as QB 8 by points on FanDuel. On the other side, Jared Goff, QB 7. They're 9 and 13, respectively, in terms of value. You've got 11 touchdowns against 4 interceptions for Stroud. You've got 14 against 4 for Jared Goff. Again, very high-end quarterbacks. Goff outgaining Stroud, 8.7 yards per pass attempt to 7.2. But there's a lot of production in the passing game. Both these teams are active passers. Again, Nico Collins trying to fight his way back. Have not added him back to projections, but that's probably the top-end injury situation to monitor. They did add him back to the active roster, but they haven't. He's still questionable. So that would be a big get, especially with Tank Dell potentially questionable, or definitely questionable, potentially not going. So just monitor that situation. If Tank's out there, especially if Nico's not, he's kind of a go-to. He practiced on a limited basis. He's dealing with a back issue. Got added to the injury report on Friday. So that's also concerning. It's kind of the last man standing in the passing attack right now. He's drawn 5.9 targets a game, but picked up 9 last week in an uptick. 2 touchdowns on the season on a 10.4 yard ADOT. I forgot to fix his Nathaniel or whatever it is. But a significant chunk of the air yards right now in this role as the primary receiver. Dalton Schultz, the other primary target, while there's no Nico, while there's no Steph Diggs. Schultz still floating with no touchdowns on the season, but there's regular targeting, 4.9 a game, spiked up to 6 last time out. He is a downfield tight end, 9.2 yard average depth of target is very good for a tight end, 15.4% of the air yards. Just hasn't found his way into the end zone like so many tight ends this year, but ranks out as T9, 7. I don't know why I'm abbreviating all the positions like that. I would never say it that way, except I just did. But tight end 9, tight end 7 by points. Tank, again, wide receiver 3 by points right now. Wide receiver 1 by points per dollar. A lot of potential there. Just need him to take the field. This comes down a little bit. If Nico plays, they probably just bite into one another. But I think they would be no worse than top 15, probably both. And it would enhance the entire look of the Houston side of the stack. Joe Mixon, another volume monster. 21 carries a game for the season with 3.3 targets a game. So he's getting, like, for the season, he missed a couple games in there, 3. But his regular work is like Kamara's enhanced workload. That's how much they give Joe Mixon the ball this year. 4.8 yards per rush attempt is terrific. Over 100 yards per game is terrific. 6 rushing touchdowns on the season. A fair amount of targeting in the passing game. 1 receiving touchdown on the board this season. He's been over 100 yards in each of their last 4 games since returning from injury and in 5 of his 6 games this season. Joe Mixon is fantastic. He's going to be going up against a rush defense that's allowing 4.8 yards per rush attempt so far this season to rank 27th, while they're at 14th, 6.9 yards per pass attempt. They can get after the quarterback a little bit. 26% pressure rate. They picked up 20 sacks on the season. They have 11 interceptions, which is a reasonable interception rate. But Joe Mixon should be able to do a lot of damage here. He's expensive, so he's $9,000. He's running back 6 by points, but 12 by points per dollar on FanDuel. Difficult to get like Mixon, one of Kamara or Bijan, and then still have like a Saquon, a Taylor. You know, the 3 very high-end running backs is a little bit difficult this week on FanDuel. They've got everybody priced up a little. But that's a really interesting late-night smash spot. Really like Joe Mixon. Will definitely have some. Xavier Hutchinson as a downboard value option should probably pick up a little bit of additional projection. I was going to change it, but then I'm just kind of waiting on Nico, so I don't want to leave him out, get him overextended, and then have Nico play. But if you see this go up a little bit, he becomes a little more valuable, obviously. Just 1.4 targets a game for him, 1.4 a game for Robert Woods on limited action, and 1.2 per game for John Mechie so far. Hutchinson ran 31 routes last week, was targeted 3 times over 56 snaps. He was the snap leader among those 3 players. Then it was Mechie with 47 snaps. He ran 29 routes, was targeted twice. And then Woods played 37 snaps, ran 23 routes, was targeted 3 times, caught 2 balls for 44 yards. He had the biggest day out of the 3, but was actually the lowest volume guy and the lowest potential volume guy. Do with that information what you will. I don't really like these 3 receivers. What I'm hoping for is we get an upside day with Nico and Tank both playing. Hutchinson would be my go-to out of that group. 56, not a terrible price to find him. Everybody else, just mix and match quality at best down the board. And then on the Lions side, we're getting Jameson Williams back from suspension. He ranks as wide receiver 29, 33 across sites. That's playable at a 3 or 4 man position, especially when we're talking about a big play player. 13.5 yard average depth of target on the season, was picking up 5 targets a game before he was suspended. 28.6% of the air yards, 3 touchdowns on the season. He's a significant piece, and I think they're going to want to put him right back into action. So I like the upside here for some Jameson, and honestly, especially with the way that Amon-Ra hits the top of the board, if he gets a little bit slept on by the field after missing 2 games, I'm happy to go back there. His week 7 game before the suspension, before the absence, was also not that great. Picked up just 1 target on 22 routes run that week for -4 yards. So with that one, also maybe poisoning the well a little bit, I like the upside. It's a big play receiver. That's all we need, especially end of the night. Nowhere else to turn. Like it a lot. Samuel Laporte has managed to find the end zone twice. It's on just 3.3 targets a game. It's been a lot more limited than he was basically all of last season. 4.9 yard average depth of target. He is returning 11.5 yards per target. Some good output for the limited volume, but it's been a little bit difficult to really trust Laporta upside. 5,800, not a great price to find that limited volume. Just 8.97% of the air yards. He gets bit into a little bit by the volume that goes to both running backs. You're talking about a two-headed running back situation that's demanding 26.6 carries a game and a handful of targets. So that's a lot of potential touches just going to Gibbs and Montgomery every single week. With good reason. 7 rushing touchdowns apiece. 6.4 yards per rush attempt for Gibbs. He's fantastic. 4.4 yards for David Montgomery per attempt. Can still get it done. Gibbs has a touchdown in the passing game. A little bit more involvement. 3.1 targets a game. Neither guy gets out beyond the line of scrimmage, really. But both guys pick up potential touches. These guys, if either one of them was ever going to get 20-plus potential touches, you run off and buy them immediately. They don't need the 20 touches. They're kind of exceptions, even in a two-headed situation, because they just do so much scoring for this team. So I'm always happy to get to shares of either one. Neither one is expensive or inexpensive. 13th and 20th by points per dollar, but solid for, again, a two-headed situation. Very solid. Khalif Raymond, Tim Patrick, just downfield limited target dart throws. 11.9 yard average depth of target for Timmy Patrick so far this season. No touchdowns on 12.5% of the air yards. 7.4 yard average depth of target for Khalif Raymond, a little bit closer in of a player. Little bit of a weapon if they're 15 yards out. You could get the look in the red zone for him. 2 touchdowns on the season, 2.3 targets a game. Just a mix and match quality player. Brock Wright as a second string tight end, just drawing 1.4, much more of just like a showdown piece. If you happen to be playing this game for the showdown slate, though, Brock Wright, definitely a name to keep in mind because he does see a little bit of volume. He is a big target in the red zone. So I like the upside there for the backup tight end, which we're always looking for in showdown format. Just keep that in mind. I think the defenses, I don't love that Detroit rates out that high. I might give the Detroit defense a little bit of a haircut in the next update. Just cut them down like under 6 a little bit. They're an okay scoring defense as far as like what scores fantasy points. I struggle with the idea that they're going to be able to suppress Houston to the degree that that Houston's scoring doesn't ruin what their defense is able to create, though. That one might come down a little bit. I don't know that they're going to be 5-2. Texans 22nd across the board. No appeal there. It basically has to be Joe Mixon as your top most likely bonus guy. But any of Amon-Ra, who I didn't really mean to skip over, he ranks 2nd by fantasy points and 8th by points per dollar. He sees 7.4 targets a game, 6 touchdowns on the season, 30% of the air yards on a mid-board type of average depth of target. Amon-Ra is fantastic. So he could easily be your next man up for a bonus. Jahmyr Gibbs could easily hit that target. Honestly, Montgomery could too. He needs to do a little bit more grindy work than Gibbs does. But you've got multiple bites at the bonus apple. Tank could get there. Nico, if Nico plays, could surpass everybody on that list as a most likely bonus guy. Tons of potential fantasy scoring here. 49-point upside in the end game on the FanDuel slate. Come on back, DraftKings folks. Hope your break was good. Stephen Cunningham's here. What's up, Steven? Yo, what's up, gang? Late to the party, but I'm here. Appreciate you, buddy. Appreciate everybody who's here, by the way, hanging out. Oh, wait, I know more people watch over, overnight and into tomorrow and everything. And I don't sweat the numbers, but the folks who actually jump in beginning of the show, hang out through all of this, chat, keep me going. Really appreciate you guys, and you're always here. Yeah, Anthony Taylor. I don't think Knicks is necessarily like totally bad. There's definitely a list of quarterbacks that I'd rather have him than. I think my Giants quarterback might be on that list. And I think Sutton's a good target for him. I just think they need to grow that entire operation around him. Having a more competent rushing attack, I think, would also really help. But he's at least demonstrated that he's serviceable right now with room to grow. So, yeah, I don't think they're completely shot in the foot with Knicks. It's just what are we getting out of them right now this weekend for our DFS purposes. So, yeah, Levine, Steven, I think I had him right at 32. Let me just double check, though. And if anybody spots anything on Emmanuel quickly, that's the later game though, so we'll be able to take care of that anyway. Yeah, I'm comfy where I've got him as far as minutes go. And that Chicago-Atlanta game, by the way, also was just in terms of the total, was really interesting. That was a 239-point total. Basketball, by the way. 239-point total in that one. Versus the Brooklyn-Cleveland game, the other early game, was a 12.5-point spread in Cleveland's favor and a 220.5-point total. So those are dramatically different games. Chicago-Atlanta is a 3-point spread with a 239-point total. That one went up 3.5 points during the afternoon from when I first did the projections to when I updated them before this show. So that's a point spread it's one of the higher we've seen so far. Top of my head, I don't know that we've had any 240 pluses on a main slate this year yet. So that's one of the more aggressive totals we've seen. So that's a really appealing game, which could honestly just float Levine anyway, even if he only goes 32. There's just upside for everybody in that game. So really like that one. And then what I did with my lineups, I made sure that I got some pieces for from that late game, the Toronto and Clippers game, so that I can move, well, not necessarily move things around because the first two both lock at 7:30, and I'm almost definitely going to still be talking to you guys here. But so that I'll have at least a little inside that game potential flexibility, I guess. I don't know. I wanted more pieces from that game. I thought Norm Powell, James Harden, Zubac, a couple other guys in that one look good. Barrett, especially if no IQ. Anyway, keeping on with football. Love the Minnesota side. Don't like the New England side. Saw Mac Jones, brain went New England. I wasn't even going to say it that way, and I just glanced in that direction, and the connection was made, and the words came out of my mouth. Jacksonville side with Mac Jones at the helm. Whole new operation for Mac Jones here. No love for that side. Outside of the fact that he is crashing the top of the value board, he ranks 18th by points on a day where there are, 20 DraftKings quarterbacks in play? But his $4,400 price tag has him as QB2 by value. I hate that. But it is there. That is not a good projection. I do not think there's a ton of upside for him. Mac Jones, last year, .345 pass attempts. He completed just under 65% of them. 2,100 yards, 10 touchdowns, and 12 picks. 442 attempts the year before. 14 touchdowns, 11 interceptions, 2,900 yards. In 2021, he threw the ball 521 times, played all 17 games that year as a rookie. 3,800 yards, 22 touchdowns, 13 picks. Wasn't completely awful that year, to be quite honest. Wasn't really, took 2 steps backward over the next 2 years. Missed some games in there. Maybe a little bit of the potentially get elevated by playing with a talented receiver like Brian Thomas. If he's able to suit up, he's dealing with limitations in practice and a chest injury. It didn't keep him out last week, but he didn't have a big game last week either. 2 catches on 4 targets, 33 routes, 22 yards. That was coming off back-to-back weeks with touchdown catches, though. Evan Engram is an effective tight end who sees tons of volume in this passing attack. 10 targets again last week, caught 5 for 45 yards. The scoring comes and goes, the catches come and go with the quality of the throws, but he does see significant volume. He was targeted, I've said it a number of times on these shows, like 140 times in this offense last year and caught 100 plus. So a significant volume tight end. It's just, you only really hit the upside when he finds his way into the end zone, which is here and there. Tank probably going to come down a little. Travis Etienne cleared from injury, going to go up a little. Between the two, Tank might be the more talented running back, but it's Etienne's job to lose here. Tank gaining 5.5 yards per rush attempt on 10.3 carries per game in his limited action. He's got 4 rushing touchdowns on the season to the 2 that Etienne has. 3.7 targets per game going in Etienne's direction with 8.4 carries per game. Tank carried the ball just 8 times last week for 22 yards in kind of a limited performance. Etienne in that one carried the ball just 3 times. Ran 12 routes, was targeted 3 times. But that was only over 16 snaps. Maybe it is a little bit more deserving to just be a straight up split. This will go up a little. This will come down maybe a little bit more than this goes up. And they'll probably meet in the middle. Just with that a little bit of murkiness around the snaps. I don't love the running back situation with Jacksonville in either direction, honestly. I think if you're going there to try and exploit the value, it probably makes the most sense to consider like Mac Jones, Evan Engram stacks. Real skinny stack built around the quarterback, the super cheap quarterback, and the effectively cheap tight end. And just hope that that is a 10-plus target connection that you can access really cheap. And if you happen to catch the touchdown there, obviously, you've gained tremendously. I like that better than pairing Mac Jones. I mean, Brian Thomas is a separate issue. If he plays, you can definitely go there. He's very good. But I think I like that better than going like downboard with Davis. I definitely like that approach to the Jags in general than going with either of the running backs. So that's probably the way I would go, is like Mac Jones, Evan Engram. And it's really significantly more, I won't say only, but I'll say significantly more viable on DraftKings for the major discount. They're 11 and 5 by points per dollar, respectively, on FanDuel. There is value there, but it's not quite as dramatic. Everybody else just kind of mix and matchy. Thomas has a very solid 11.8 yard ADOT, 26% of the air yards, and 5 touchdowns on the season. Again, we just need him really to be on the field and at full health to put up his regular volume. Davis is targeted 4.5 times a game. He's got 2 touchdowns on the board, 11.7 yard average depth of target. So some big playability there for a relatively cheap price. But once we start talking about downfield opportunities, well, now we got to talk about downfield throws from Mac Jones, and we start to separate from reality a little bit. Parker Washington, sub 2 targets a game for all these guys. Really don't see that much upside. One of these guys, Parker Washington, most likely, maybe some Tim Jones if you don't have Brian Thomas out there. I expect Thomas will suit up. He might just be a little bit, artificially limited again. But no more than mix and match quality down here. Brenton Strange has a couple of oddball tight end touchdowns. He's got 2 on the board, seeing 2.8 targets a game overall for the season. A very, very, very cheap but bad dart to throw at the bottom of the board. All the quality in this game is on the Minnesota side. Like I was saying earlier, I love the idea of stacking this team at least a little bit and hoping that Mac Jones can keep Jacksonville in the game for at least the first half. Because Jefferson, wide receiver 1 by points on both sides, 4 by value on both sides. Sammy Darnold, quarterback 3 by points and 1 by value on both sides. Jones, running back 6'3", 5'3" across sites. Super valuable again. Right back toward the top of the board. Jordan Addison ranks out like a very playable receiver. Hawkinson doesn't really crush as a tight end as far as those rankings go. 4,700, 6,500 doesn't really hit too hard as a points per dollar value. Just 18, 17 across sites. But definitely major scoring upside, touchdown scoring potential in a stack that rates as stacked 2 by points, 1 and 2 across sites by points per dollar value. Jacksonville's defense, allowing 4.4 yards per rush attempt, ranks 10th. That's not bad, but it's also not a total blockade. 8.2 yards per pass attempt, most notably, should have people drooling over the Sam Darnold, Justin Jefferson combo. At worst, that's probably the best receiver in football, going up against one of the demonstrably worst pass defenses in football. Absolutely sign me up. 2 interceptions on the season for this team. They have 20 sacks on a 17.5% pressure rate. There's nothing overly impressive about the Jacksonville defense. Nothing that Darnold won't be able to handle. Addison has 2 touchdowns on the board. Jefferson has 5. Addison operates a little further down the field than even Jefferson, but they're both big-time, big-play down-the-field receivers. 15.3 yard ADOT, 12.7 yard ADOT. Jefferson, with his 8.6 targets, dominating 44% of the air yards for this team. Massive, massive target. Stephen Leibowitz makes a good point. Mac did throw a lot to Hunter Henry in New England. Feeds the tight end narrative there, sure. When you have Matt Patricia and Joe Judge running your offense in New England, Mahomes would have sucked. Yeah, also fair. I wouldn't completely rule it out for Mac Jones to come out and be all right. We've seen him be all right. It's just, not exactly like a rock solid veteran stepping in as a backup here, and not exactly, he's not even Sam Darnold. Let's see. What's his best individual game? Last year, topped out in week 1. Very good game week 1 against Philly. Completed 35 of 54 for 316 yards, 3 touchdowns. Is it out of the question that he could do that? If he's got Brian Thomas out there. I mean, that's the thing. This Jacksonville squad does have good supporting skill players. They could elevate Mac Jones to a decent performance. After that 300-yard game, his next highest total was 25 of 30 for 272 yards and 2 touchdowns all the way in week 7. That was, again, last year. Had a 300-yard game in week 3 the year before, but threw 3 interceptions against no touchdown passes. 382 yards on 28 of 39 against Minnesota, notably. But this is, again, back in 2022. 2 touchdowns that week. And then 310 and 2 and 307 and 2. So he's been over 300 yards, what was that, 4 or 5 times in his career. Handful of touchdown passes. He's capable of getting 303. It wouldn't knock me out of my chair. So again, where we're showing value, not to oversell this position, but that is a significant point per dollar value. He's a $4,400 quarterback with good supporting skill players. So yeah. I maybe like it a little bit better thinking it through than I did as I was talking about it. There is definitely value there. Minnesota's defense, pretty stout against both the run and the pass, though. 3.8 yards per rush attempt is 3rd. 6.9 yards per pass attempt is 14th. A 30% pressure rate is going to be problematic for Mac Jones. 27 sacks and 13 interceptions, also problematic. So adding that part of the equation back into the thinking it through. Maybe we unwind it again. Let's see. Interception rate, 4.11 is 1st. 7.87% sack rate is 11th. They're allowing 2.3 touchdowns a game, which is 10th. But only 0.4 rushing touchdowns per game, which is 1st. They're very, very good against the run, which just feeds more into that. Don't really want to go into that split situation between Tank and Travis Etienne. But what that could impact is, forcing them to throw the ball significantly more. Then they're coming after Mac Jones with a pretty aggressive blitz. Or pretty aggressive pass rush, anyway. The value's there, though, on the salary. It's a solid, at least middle type of a stack option, but everything to love is over here. All about Darnold plus Jefferson, Jefferson, easily your biggest bonus option in this game. But Aaron Jones is right there. 100-yard potential, easily. Jordan Addison, one big play away from a 100-yard day. So multiple bonus options on the Minnesota side. Not so much on the Jacksonville side. Minnesota stacked 2 by points. Stack 1 by value on DraftKings. 2 by value on FanDuel. Big spot. What's going on here? Chicago, New England, 39-point game. Don't like this one all that much at all. Yeah, I get you, Steven. It's just that kicked me off, down that line of just thinking a little bit more about the nature of the player and the situation and everything. And it ultimately wound up kind of in a wash between how good that defense has been and how much it's going to limit his rushing game, the impact of that passing attack or that pass rush. There's a lot not to like, but again, it does, I think the fair place to land on Mac Jones is wouldn't surprise me if he had a 250 and 2 type day. I think that's perfectly reasonable. And if he went north of that, it wouldn't be completely stunning. He's done it before. Caleb and his weapons, definitely the thing to like in this game. And then just maybe Ramondre Stevenson shares. Maybe, I guess, some Hunter Henry shares. Looks like they're a little bit of value here. But really not much from the New England side. Drake May at the helm again. Come on. May last week coming off the concussion, 29 of 41 for 206, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions. He's been decent though. I mean, their pass game is definitely more capable with him throwing the ball, but only moderately so because he's throwing the ball to Demario Douglas, Keishon Boutte, Kendrick Bourne. These are not the best receivers in football. Douglas had 7 catches, but only gained 35 yards on his 9 targets last week. Boutte had 2 catches for 18 on 6 targets. Bourne had 4 catches for 41 on his 6 targets. This is the output we get from receivers like this. Jalen Polk was targeted just once on 3 routes run last week. Didn't play the week before, targeted 3 times on 20 routes the week before. So you're talking about very low-end, limited targeting down in the value column down here with Jalen Polk. It really is just in weeks where he's healthy and, when not in the doghouse with coaching or whatever. Ramondre Stevenson. Even he, though, the touches come and go. Last week, 10 carries for 16 and a touchdown. Caught 5 of 5 in the passing game for 38 and a second touchdown. Fantasy scoring kind of got there, but that's 15 potential touches. Just happened to get them into the end zone. 2 touchdown runs on 20 carries, but only 48 yards gained the week before that against the Jets. Caught 3 of 3 for 17 yards, but that game, that's 23 potential touches. Week before that, 10 potential touches, a DNP, 16, 18. The volume's really all over the place. So he's just okay. Running back 13 by points and value on DraftKings, 16 in both categories on FanDuel. The stack doesn't really rank out all that well. You gain a little ground in points per dollar, but not in an appealing way. Bottom 13. Going up against a gettable defense. Chicago's D's allowed 5 yards per rush attempt, 6.9 yards per pass. 27% quarterback pressure rate, 23 sacks, 7 interceptions. It's decent in terms of getting to the quarterback, finding some scoring events for DFS. But as far as yardage allowed, as far as a little bit of scoring, there's potential there. But it's really ugly on this offense. Hunter Henry has 1 touchdown catch. He picked up 8 targets last week, 5.9 per week to lead the team. 5.3 per week for Demario Douglas. He is the nominal 1 as far as the wide receiver core goes. Doesn't exactly work on a big play average depth of target, 6.9 yards. Has the second most air yards, third most air yard percentage on the team, despite leading in targets by 2. 1 touchdown grab for him, 1 for Hunter Henry, 1 for Ramondre, 1 for Keishon Boutte, and on down the line. There is no standout receiving option on this team. On the Chicago side, you get Caleb. He's been all right. Couple big games in there. Couple of meh-type performances. Last time out, 22 of 41 for 217 yards, no touchdown, no pick. Week before that against Washington in what was kind of a letdown performance on his end of what could have been a decent DFS game. Completed just 10 of 24, 131 yards, no touchdown. Didn't throw an interception, but that was a bad game. Ran the ball 9 times for 47 in that one. That was his most rushing attempts. Second highest rushing yard volume. Hasn't scored yet on the ground, interestingly. Depending on how you want to look at it, he peaked either at 52 pass attempts and 363 yards in week 3 against Indy, or with 4 touchdown passes on 23 of 29 passing, but just for 226 yards against Jacksonville in week 6 before their bye. Overall, 61% completion rate, not really getting it done. 9 touchdown passes, 5 interceptions. We need more. 6.3 yards per pass attempt. He's only been okay, but he's got excellent weapons to work with in DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, and Rome Odunze. He's more kept them down, I think, so far this year. But you're seeing good targeting. 7.5 for DJ, 7 for Keenan Allen, and 5.5 going in Rome Odunze's direction. So any 1 in a Caleb +1, any 2 in a Caleb +2, or any one of those 3 guys as a standalone option for a honestly affordable receiver with a lot of talent. Remember, you're talking about 2 guys who are stars, former, aging stars that this team acquired over the last 2 seasons. And then a top, 7, somewhere in that territory? A kid who was, let's put it this way, the Giants were considering with the pick that they took Neighbors. And he ended up he's a top 10. I forget what the exact draft position was. But there's a lot of talent on the board with those 3 receivers. Rome's got just 1 touchdown, but he's leading the way in terms of the air yard share at 32.29, despite trailing the 2 veterans by a target and a half at best. 15-yard average depth of target. DJ operating on a 10-yard, 9.2 for Keenan Allen. So everybody's getting up, getting downfield. Everybody's got big playability. 6 combined touchdowns across the 3 receivers across 9 games, or 8 games rather. Not significant scoring output, but again, that's more the quarterback. Cole Kmet has 3 touchdown grabs, tied with DJ Moore for the team lead. 3.8 targets a game, but they're significant enough targets if he's scoring. 7.7 yard average depth of target, not bad. He is a tight end that gets out, gets down the field in patterns a little bit. I'm not a big DeAndre Swift fan. 4 yards per rush attempt is just okay. He's got 4 rushing touchdowns on the season. He's got okay volume. Under 20 potential touches a week, but above 18 is not bad. Typically, I want the 20, but I'll take the 18, so that's fine. But just not an impressive runner, not an impressive decision maker as a running back. Limits his explosive playability a little bit. I don't love DeAndre. He's fine. He ranks 11-10 on DraftKings, 13-14 on FanDuel. Caleb is showing a good amount of value. If we're comparing value quarterbacks, there's a lot more talent here and a lot more skill player weapons here for Caleb than there is for Bo Nix, than there is for Mac Jones. So considering that Caleb's third, it's a different price. 56 is not 44 like we were seeing on Mac, but he is the next most valuable quarterback in a points per dollar sense, 5th on FanDuel. So not uninteresting in terms of the Bears. They're favored by 6. It's just a 39-point total. It is probably still a better source of standalone players. And from that perspective, we've got a bunch of them right here. All these guys are playable. Cole Kmet as well, playable. The downside is the New England side. That plays up the Bears defense a little bit. 1-1 on DraftKings for just $3,000 against the New England Patriots. Yes, please. 1-4 on FanDuel. $5,000 on FanDuel. They're the most expensive defense here. I don't think that's the most expensive defense there. Doesn't matter at all, but now I'm curious. Yeah, there are 8 defenses priced higher than the Bears are against New England this week on DraftKings. That's silly. Like that spot a lot. Your most likely 100-yard guy, your most likely bonus guy in this one. I don't know that there is what I would call a likely guy. Yeah, I mean, everybody's like half that. I will reluctantly give it to Swift, but that's not my favorite player in this game. So those are 2 different answers. Low end game overall. Much better game. Yeah, Anthony, we talked about that Indy game, but for sure with Pittman out, I like that Indy depth receiving corps. Excuse me. It's just going to really come down to what is Joe Flacco going to give us. He just crushed us in that spot last week when we were looking for him to hold up his end of the game, but I think I'm going right back to that spot. Pretty sure they're in my placeholder lineup right now. Speaking of 7:15, let me do a quick survey of NBA news. Just make sure we're not missing anything critical. Hawks start Young, Daniels, Riche, Johnson, Capella. No issue there. Giddey, White, Levine, Williams, and Vooch for the Bulls. Schroeder, Thomas, Johnson, DFS, and Claxton. Perfectly fine there. Garland, Mitchell, Okoro, Mobley, Allen. Yep, we're good across the board. $7.15. Let me just make this not bold. All right. Come on. There we go. So, again, this one looks like a really high-end game environment, just given the 1-point spread in Arizona. 47-point total. Fair amount of talent on both sides. I have definite interest in stacking this game, I got to say. The Jets landing top 1 by points per dollar, 4th overall by points on FanDuel definitely has appeal, 3rd across both categories on DraftKings. You can not like Aaron Rodgers all you want. I don't particularly like him all that much, but there's no denying he's got a lot of weapons to work with. He's thrown 15 touchdown passes against 7 interceptions on the year, gaining 6.7 yards per pass attempt. He's been fine. The volume is good, 35 attempts per game. When you're unloading those attempts to Devontae Adams and Garrett Wilson, with some Breece Hall mixed in, with some Tyler Conklin at the tight end position, there's a lot of appeal. Especially when you're going up against the defense that's been pretty soft against the pass. 7.6 yards allowed per pass attempt. Just an 18.6% pressure rate. Only 5 interceptions on the season. Rodgers should be able to stand tall in the pocket and find his receivers in this one. They're also bad against the rush, which should benefit Breece Hall and should also benefit the passing game. If you can't shut down the rush, that means I can throw against you too. So, like all things Jets in this one, definitely an interesting stack for this week. And at worst, you've got some support for bring-back plays from the Arizona side. Both sides can contribute at standalone guys. You could easily go to playing a Josh Allen, Khalil Shakir lineup, and that's my main stack over there. But then from this game, I decided I'm going to grab some Marvin against Devontae or some Marvin against Garrett Wilson and put both those receivers in like a head-to-head in a high-end scoring and passing situation just against one another to grab a little upside from this game. So I like doing things like that. That's the thing that I set when I build lineups. In the optimizer on RG, you can set multiple different types of stacks. And as a secondary stack, I do that for like 25% of lineups, where I tell it, all right, give me a duel between 2 pass catchers in the same game. Sometimes I'll restrict it to, from among these games. Sometimes I'll just let fly because you get highly projected players either way. But this is definitely a scenario where it would be interesting, and you've got at least 2 guys for that on the Jets. You could say Trey McBride and Marvin Harrison for that role and say there's 2 guys for it on Arizona as well. Just make sure you're if you're using that function on RG in particular, make sure that you select the box that's wide receivers and tight ends. Kyler Murray, QB 8-10 across sites by points, a little bit close for value. He's thrown 11 touchdowns against just 3 interceptions. The ratio is good. The yards per game, the volume overall is not. Sub 200 yards per game, 7.1 yards per attempt on 28 attempts per game. They've been a better rushing attack than they have a pass attack this year. Connor's gaining 4.5 yards per rush attempt, 16.3 attempts per game. He adds a couple potential touches through the passing game. 4 touchdowns on the season on the ground. Murray's got 2 of his own. He's gained 8.1 yards per rush attempt. Not running a ton this year, 4.8 attempts per game, but still capable of getting away from trouble at the worst. A lot of that 6.3 yards before contact, scrambles, some designed QB runs, but not the biggest feature of his game, but capable in that department. In terms of who he's throwing the ball to, it's the Marv show. 5 touchdowns on the season, 41.9% of the air yards on 6.1 targets a game. His production has come and gone a little bit, here and there. He's had some decent upside games. He's had some clunkers mixed in. But just the sheer volume and the shape of the opportunities, given the fact that he is a good downfield receiver and he's picking up that much of the team's air yard share, there's tons and tons of upside there for a pairing or as a standalone. And he's only going to get better. He was picked where he was for a reason. Trey is one of the top tight ends in the league, 7.5 targets a game on a 7.4 yard ADOT. He garners 23% of the air yards on this team. He just needs to score in the passing attack. Picked up a rushing touchdown last week. I knew he got in the end zone. I didn't realize it was on a run. Yeah, carried the ball once for 2 yards and a touchdown. That's his only rushing attempt of the season. Caught 3 passes for 35 yards last week. He was on the upswing the several weeks before that, though. 8 of 8 for 96, 5 of 7 for 51, and then 9 of 11 for 124. Just was not scoring. The receiving touchdowns will come. He's got 7 red zone targets on the season in 8 games played. The receiving touchdowns will come for Trey. And he's just got such a cool name. Trey McBride. How cool does that sound? A T, McBride, an R, and an E, and a Y in there. It's got to just be a cool guy. Mikey Wilson, mix and match kind of a player. 10.5 yard average depth of target, 21.84% of the air yards. 3 touchdowns on the season. Not a bad mix and match player. Not a bad guy if you're building a bunch of Arizona stacks to rotate through some of the +2s. It's probably a little bit thin to go Murray Wilson as just a +1. It's probably more functional as a +2, maybe as a value, big play value dart in a standalone sense, if you need to get real cheap in a spot. Greg Dortch is the similar function, but he doesn't have the average depth of target, just a 6.1 yard ADOT, 10% of the air yards, 1 touchdown on the season. So when we're picking those kind of opportunities, and I've pointed this out on shows a bunch of times, I'm sure you guys have heard it elsewhere, with limited sub 5 targets a game, I'm always going to lean toward the guy who's got the better shape of opportunity, the more downfield opportunity. Even sometimes if it's the 3.6, like with Alec Pierce, if it's the lower target guy, but particularly with Pierce with his 22-yard average depth of target, it's a different nature of play. You come down with just a couple. It's like a home run hitter versus a guy who collects some doubles but doesn't hit that many home runs. Same idea. So I'm going to take the guy with the big average depth of target with a little bit more scoring and big play potential for my tournament shares when I'm looking for those value guys. Dortch, as a minor option in the +2 cents in stacks, is fine, but really needs more volume than this, given the nature of the type of receiver he is. Much more likely to just give you like 3 catches, 30 empty yards. Again, Connor's the running back of choice. You get a little involvement for Amari DeMarcado in the passing game. Trey Benson, not really looking like much of a piece outside of, unless something happened and he got thrust into volume. Otherwise, there's really nothing there. Zay Jones, no more than a dart throw. Elijah Higgins, same thing. With everybody healthy, those guys get very, very limited as far as their opportunities go. On the Jets side, Brees, really the only limitation has been a little bit of a cap in his scoring. 4 yards per rush attempt is just okay. That's a little bit limiting as well. 14 carries a game is fine, especially when you're adding 5.6 targets in the passing game. Gives me my 19.6 potential touches. 1 receiving touchdown, 3 rushing touchdowns. Not ideal. The 1.8 yards before contact should be a little bit better for a running back like him. But definite big playability, definite big player volume. Devontae picked up 11 targets last time out. Garrett Wilson was targeted 10 times in the same game. More than enough opportunities to go around to support both of those big play receivers. 8.8 yard ADOT, but only a couple games so far with the Jets for Devontae. 9.2 yards down the field for Garrett Wilson. 5 touchdowns for Wilson playing the full season with Aaron Rodgers. 33% of the air yards so far. Devontae could even these things out in a big, big hurry starting this week, though. 3 touchdowns is always on the board for Devontae. Put him on that list, by the way, of multi-touchdown potential guys. They're going to have their day. I forgot about this game when we were talking about that. This is a big total game, is one I'm definitely interested in. So, and honestly, Garrett Wilson, Breece Hall, that could be like a Breece/Garrett/Devontae, any one of those 3 guys, but obviously not all 3 of those guys unless the Jets are really going to explode. Between the 2, I do like Devontae a little bit better than Garrett Wilson. Reason being, Aaron Rodgers already had Garrett Wilson, and he made the team go out and get Devontae. And he didn't care who stood in his way as far as coaches or anything like that. So that's going to push the targets up. He's going to be the more favored option. He's going to be the guy that Rodgers is going to inherently look for when they're in close, when he needs the big play. But on talent, you're not talking about much difference, if any difference at all, if Devontae's even better. As far as the rankings, the projections go, look where these guys land. Devontae, 3-1 across DraftKings, 5-2 on FanDuel, 5-8 and 8-9 for Garrett Wilson. Rodgers +2 all day. Tyler Conklin, a mix and match tight end at the worst. The Jets defense is looking pretty playable. Conklin's drawn 4.4 targets a game. He picked up 2 touchdowns so far. Was a little bit limited over the first few weeks, but kind of came back to life with some targeting. Guy they do look to get involved. The 2 touchdowns came in week 7 and 8, and then he dipped back down last week. Just 2 targets, caught one of them for -3 yards. 4 targets in each of the 2 games prior to that. 4 catches just for 7 yards and a TD. 42 yards on 3 catches with a touchdown is more like it. They will throw to him going down the field. They will give him opportunities to make plays here and there. So Conklin is a reasonable play as a tight end. Other than that, a little bit of just explosive playability in the 1 to 2 times they might touch the ball in Malachi Corley and Xavier Gibson. But again, you're talking about 1.1 combined touches in their limited action so far. So not a lot of appeal there. Stick to the top end with the Jets. I think you'll be just fine. I'm going to give the bonus to Devontae as the most likely bonus guy, but you have multiple bites at that apple in this game. Really like this game for upside. Battle of the NFC East, that probably isn't going to be that much of a battle. Philly, the class of the division. Dallas, 3rd best team. Giants are the worst team in the division, by the way. By a wide margin. The Giants are so bad. Dallas, at the very least, gives you some upside players, but they're going to be severely limited here by Cooper Rush being a quarterback. No more Dak for the season. I still don't mind some CeeDee Lamb, and honestly, if people are going to go away from him just because he's playing with Cooper Rush, then maybe that's a reason to consider some shares of him. Anytime on a player like that, who on his own can just kind of stand tall against the field, there's always upside there. Rushed through 25 passes last week, completed 13 of them for 115 yards and a touchdown. He's moderately capable. It might not completely ruin the day. You can see on his own, he doesn't project out well. He is ruining their overall rankings as a team. He's going up against a defense that's been pretty stout against the pass this year, 6.5 yards allowed per pass attempt. They haven't really been hammering the quarterback with pressure. They've gotten to him 22 times as far as sacks go, moderate number of interceptions. But it's a good defense as far as stopping the run, stopping the pass a little bit, limiting the yardage, which with a backup quarterback at the helm is obviously going to be a major problem as far as their ability to string plays together, march down the field, earn first downs, and keep drives alive. So don't like the spot that much for Dallas. Don't really like the spot for Rico Dowdle. I don't think that the quarterback limitation necessarily leads directly to upside for the running back. 7 carries for 71 yards last week, 6 for 23 yards the week before for Dowdle. Just a limited talent at the position. 4.5 yards per rush attempt on 10 carries a game. No touchdowns on the board. Zeke Elliott's expected to be active again for this one. You've also got Dalvin Cook there. I don't really have any interest in either of the veterans. Zeke so far this year, 3.1 yards per attempt is pretty lame. 2 touchdowns on the season. Hasn't really been relevant at all. Jake Ferguson, with the idea of they're still going to call his number. He was targeted 10 times last week, 7.4 on average. He's a significant target in this offense. And just playing the safety valve for Cooper Rush, maybe picks up a little bit of additional action, maybe sees a little bit of additional work in the red zone if they get the opportunity. No touchdowns this season for Ferguson either. Another one of those weird tight end performances this year, but a very high-end tight end. Devonta Turpin, no real love. 10.1 yard average depth of target, but now we got Cooper Rush throwing the ball. 1 touchdown on the season on 3.5 targets a game. Mix and match piece for depth at best. What I think the best piece of Dallas is probably just CD, either, obviously standalone or as a bring back play on the other side of very high end Philly stacks. Again, with Philly, this is what I was talking about before. On both sites, you've got 4 players that project among the most highly at their positions. So they are just week after week landing in raw scoring as stack 1. But by point per dollar, they're 12 and 13 across sites because all these guys are super expensive. As discussed, Hurts and Saquon, your most likely contributors of rushing touchdowns on the entire slate. Those 2 players combining for 2 rushing touchdowns, I love, if you can find that as a bet. One of those guys getting 2 rushing touchdowns is the most likely guy, in my opinion, on the slate to get 2 rushing touchdowns on the day. Which one it's going to be is difficult to tell. They have a very good way of just picking up Jalen Hurts by his pants and his jersey and using him like a battering ram, if you picture an old army trying to knock down the front door of a castle. That's how they get into the end zone. I don't know if you've ever seen it. Saquon makes things happen on his own, including spinning around, jumping over somebody backward, flying through the air. I had never seen that on a football field. I've seen dudes hurdle other dudes before. I've never seen somebody do it backward. I've never seen somebody do it backward while 6 feet in the air with his legs tucked all the way into his chin so he was floating like a turtle shell in Mario Kart. That was amazing. Plays like that also lead to like career-ending injuries, and it was completely unnecessary because it was just for a moderate gain, but damn was that a play. Saquon does amazing things on the field. In my opinion, he is the best player in football. Philly should be happy to have him. I'm happy to have him when he lands in my fantasy lineups. Love the scoring potential for Saquon. Love the scoring potential for A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith, one of the best 1-1A tandems in football, and I do consider him a true 1-1A. 6.8 targets, 6.7 targets a game. Brown's missed several games. They both get up and get down the field. Brown does so a little bit better, 14.2 yard average depth of target. He's got 3 touchdowns on the year. Devonta Smith also consumes 30% of the air yards, though, has 4 touchdowns on the season. Either way, if you've got too many shares of AJ so far, your next lineup you want Smith, grab him. If you need to get a little cheaper, grab him. It's a reasonable direct pivot, 1 for 1. So you're just saving a couple bucks with directly comparable upside. Jalen, Saquon, and your favorite of the 2 wideouts, A-plus type stack. Jalen and both the wideouts, A-plus type stack. Jalen, either Saquon or one of the wideouts or both wideouts, or one of any one of those 3 players, and Dallas Goedert, who should be returning for this team. At worst, like a B plus, A minus kind of a stack. It's a little bit diminished by Goddard, but not in a points per dollar sense. 4,500, 5,900. It's only diminished in the raw projection because he's a tight end. He's one of the better tight ends as far as, the upside for catching some touchdown passes. He doesn't have any yet this season. Yet another tight end who's fallen into that bucket despite 5.8 targets a game, despite some work in the red zone. But there's any given slate, definite positional upside for Dallas Goedert. So love getting to him in combination with the quarterback. I would play Hurts, Goddard, just plus ones. I think that's perfectly fine as just kind of a cheaper, lower owned angle into owning the Philly stack, owning some Jalen Hurts. That's a perfectly reasonable way to approach it. Down the board from those guys, though, Philly thins out really, really fast. Kenny Gainwell's no more than a limited touch backup running back who really specifically needs something to happen above him on the depth chart. Jahan Dotson's just bad. Calcaterra back to the backup role. Johnny Wilson maybe just, a depth, a sub 1 target type. Dotson on 1.8 targets a game has put up 0 touchdowns. He's catching 0.9 of 1.8 targets a game, so 50% catch rate. 11.1 yard A-dot, so he can get up and get down the field, but if you're not bringing the ball in, if you're not scoring, it doesn't really do much for me. It's just a super, super high-end, top-heavy, whatever you want to call it, group of 5 right there. Any combination of those 5 players, or I should say those 4 players with the quarterback, fire away. Many shares as you can get. Love the spot. Even in just a 43.5 point game, even in a game where they're likely to blow out, those are high-end guys who typically can get out there and get theirs in that kind of a game environment. Getting carried away with big plus 2s or extending out to plus 3s, which I don't typically do all that often, might start to stretch the potential around that big point spread. But a plus 2, I definitely think can pay the bills. AJ, your month? Well, no, Saquon. It's so tough with this team. Saquon's still averaging it, right? Yeah. Saquon's averaging 130 plus yards from scrimmage, so I guess I got to give it to him. But AJ's right there. Smith's not far behind. But Saquon's your most likely bonus. He's got 6 touchdowns on the ground, 2 through the air, 115 yards a game on the ground. 19.6 carries plus 3.1 potential targets puts us over 20 potential touches. Gaining 5.9 yards per rush attempt. Best player in football. I miss him. Don't know if you could tell. That's all I got to say about this game. Oh, I can hear my poor cat locked up in the other room. He's doing the please. Need to get out of here. Yeah, I do. And Anthony saying from the basketball show, you realize ever since you got on Barrett, which was so unfair because it was his first day back from injury. It was his first game of the season. And it's a player that I like. Former Knick. I love the upside. Number 3 overall pick. Still a young kid too. He was, for all those years as a Knick, was one of the youngest players, in his draft class, or the youngest player in his draft class. Still young for his age, as Yogi would say. But, for whatever reason, it just came out of me that, hey, it doesn't really hit, upside games all that often or whatever I said. And he crushed that day, and he's had a couple good ones since. But yeah, I made sure that he was in several of my lineups today. Love the upside. Let's keep on rolling here. I like the Washington side of this one. I think Pittsburgh can hang. Seems like Vegas does too. Close game in terms of a 2.5 point spread. So if we're looking for games with like solid mid-board type totals and close spreads, this is definitely one of 2. So I can get into this a little bit on the Pittsburgh side and hope for the best. Hope that Russ keeps us going. Pickens is a talented receiver. They've got the semi-split running back situation where neither guy really grades out all that well. Freiermuth is a capable tight end, but he's not really projected all that highly. Calvin Austin, just like a mid-board dart throw type receiver. So it's not really all that appealing outside of maybe some bring-back plays. If I'm stacking this, it's almost certainly on the Washington side. Russ in his first game, 264 with 2 touchdowns on 16 of 29. 28 pass attempts last week through completed 20 of them, or 2 weeks ago rather. 278 yards and a touchdown. That was before their bye. He hasn't been bad. We looked at the numbers when he first came back in week 7 and wasn't terrible in Denver that second year. So he's still a capable version of Russ. He's just not a big scorer as far as the quarterback position goes. But he's going to be capable. He's going to be able to connect a little bit more reliably, I think, than Fields was with the George Pickenses of the world. Pickens caught 4 of those for 74 yards in week 8, and then in the first game in week 7, caught 5 balls for 111 yards and a touchdown, his biggest performance of the season on 9 targets. So it's an enhanced situation for him. You have a capable running back in Najee. I know his production can come and go. The more we talk about him, the more it tends to go away, so I'll keep my words thin. But he's been over 100 yards in 3 straight performances. 2 touchdowns in those 3 games. Jaylen Warren, more limited this year. Seeing like 2 to 3 targets a week. 5 or 6 carries, really. The actual averages are over here, so I could just give you those instead of just estimating. 6.8 carries and 2.3 targets, right about what I said. Gaining just 3.7 yards per attempt, though, to Najee's 4.4. Najee's only put the ball in the end zone twice. That's kind of one of the limitations on what his scoring output has been like this season. But the multiple games recently over 100 yards, a couple games over 20 touches in that mix, gives me a little bit of faith. He's going up against a Washington defense, too, that has allowed 5.1 yards per rush attempt this year to rank 31st. They've also allowed 7.4 yards per pass attempt to rank 21st. They're one of the worst defenses in football in terms of yardage allowed. They've got a decent pressure rate at 26.4%, a decent sack rate. Not really much as far as the interceptions go, though, just 3 on the season. So not much of a defensive secondary for Washington. Leads me to believe that there could be some upside for Russ. Definitely some upside for Najee. For cheap, for $4,200, you can get to Freiermuth. DraftKings, 3.9, 4 targets a game, basically. He's got 2 touchdowns on the season. It's not jumping out as like, this is the Pat Freiermuth week like we get every now and again. I think he's just playable here. But he's probably my second favorite option in the passing attack for this team. Like him a little bit better than Calvin Austin. Austin is getting down the field a little bit. 11.1 yard ADOT, 3.1 targets a game. He's got 2 touchdowns on the season. One of those came last week. He caught 3 balls from Russ, 54 yards and a touchdown. The first game they played together, he just had 1 catch on 4 targets, but it was for 36 yards. So Russ is letting him run down the field before he looks for him a little bit. There is big play potential there. He's just $3,500 on DraftKings. On FanDuel, he spikes up to $5,300. That's a very different price play across sites. 43-42 here. 40 by points and gains a little ground is 34 by value. So, again, when we're rostering 3 or 4 from the position, a guy who ranks 34th by points per dollar at $3,500 definitely is playable, definitely has value. Wemby has 7 blocks, has more blocks this season than 7 teams in the NBA. He's unreal. As I said all throughout last year was the worst we're ever going to see him. He's already one of only 2 players in NBA history with multiple 5x5s with 25 points. He's got 2. It's him and Hakeem. It's just 3 players with multiple 5x5s at all. It's those 2 plus Kirilenko. But, I mean, he's going to put up stat lines that we have never seen before as his career continues. Someone will come this year. He's a new mold. And there's more guys like that apparently lurking out there. These just super freaks as far as height. But like we get these guys, back in the 80s and the 90s, you'd get guys that are, of similar height, like a Manute Bol or like another like just giant type dude, like a George Murasan. But you'd watch those guys run or attempt to shoot the ball. And it's like, all right, that guy, they mixed up some parts and that's why he's really tall. But obviously those legs don't work with that body and those arms don't work with those shoulders and so on. That is not the case with these dudes. I mean, Wemby, especially when people were scouting him, we were getting those grainy videos of him, like Bigfoot. Dribbles like Steph, shoots like Steph, 11 feet tall, can dunk from the half-court line. The rumors turned out to not quite be that crazy. But, I mean, guys that can handle like that, shoot like that, forget it. It's a different sport. Guys that can block a shot 11 feet in the air, it's a different sport, 14 feet or whatever. I didn't do that measurement quite right. Anyway, getting back to this thing. Washington side, much more appealing. By the way, the Van Jefferson is a dart throw for maybe a big play, a little bit of downfield ability there. But we're outside the top 50 with him. We're outside the top 50 with Mike Williams. I do think it's interesting, the acquisition of Williams, though, as far as just a big downfield operator. 14.5 yard average depth of target this season. We've seen him be that in terms of his seasons past. So having both of those guys as downfield weapons for Russ to throw to, in addition to Calvin Austin, who also operates on that, and George Pickens is also operating down the field. There's a lot of big play potential lurking with Pittsburgh. I don't know how much we see of Mike Williams this week. I've got him on the board for just a few plays. He gets a better DraftKings projection on the PPR. Not that Mike Williams is the most reliable hands in the world. Probably knocks any Brandon Johnson, Scotty Millers out of the box unless something happens. So Jaden Daniels, one of the top quarterback projections overall, ranks as QB4 by points on both sites. 8th by points per dollar is not bad at all for FanDuel, 8,400 over there. 15th by points per dollar for your 75 on DraftKings is a little bit more challenging, but he's been excellent basically from beginning to end so far this season, or from beginning to now. 25 attempts per game is not great volume, but he does a decent amount with them, completing 71% of them. 8.5 yards per pass attempt is terrific. 9 touchdowns on the season versus 2 interceptions, pretty good. He's also got 4 rushing touchdowns. Pretty significant runner. 9.1 rushing attempts per game with 5.6 yards per rush attempt. Gives him another 50-plus yards per game. Love the upside there. I like the connection that he's got with Terry McLaurin. Another guy, man. How cool must this dude be? Terry just him and Trey McBride. Couple of pretty cool dudes. Couple of guys you got to put in your lineup. Get a couple Terry McShares in there. Probably doing all right. 73-77. Not a bad price for McLaurin's scoring upside. Not a bad price for his dominant air yard share. 45.52% of the team's air yards. It's one of the bigger marks in a not small sample. All of this is small sample, but what I'm saying is, like, it's not like he played 2 games, got a big chunk or whatever. So, or not that the team lost somebody who's got another big chunk and he's just mathing out that way. He sees a significant portion of their air yards. Austin Eckler stepping up into the primary running back position, which should be functional enough, I guess, for DFS purposes at worst. 5,800, 6,800 across sites. He's gained 5.6 yards per rush attempt on 6.5 carries a game. He's got 2 rushing touchdowns on the season. Not my favorite running back by a long stretch of the imagination, but should see enough carries to potentially be effective. The 5.6 is going to come down with more attempts, but should see the opportunities to be decent here. I actually prefer McNichols. I think he's just the more explosive, more interesting player, and he's going to be way lower owned at a lower cost, 44.53. He's got 3 rushing touchdowns in very limited carries so far this year, 3.8 carries per game, 5.4 yards per rush attempt. There's just some potential sneaky ability there, but with the assumption that Eckler's going to be the lead option here by, 3-1 margin, I think that's where your shares belong. And you can see that in the rankings. Noah Brown, not a bad depth option. 29th but 20th by points per dollar on DraftKings. 31st but 23rd by points per dollar on FanDuel. Seeing 4.4 targets a game on a 12.6 yard ADOT. Basically 20% of the team's air yards. Just one touchdown this season. But there's definitely potential there for a big play. There's potential for target volume for Zach Ertz. He's seen 5+ a game for the season, but dipped down to just 1 in their last game. 8.5 yard ADOT, 1 touchdown, but 20% of the air yards. So another tight end who gets out and gets into patterns and gets down the field and sees some fairly big receiving opportunities. Should be able to convert more touchdowns as the season goes on. And honestly, checks in pretty cheap. $3,800 on DraftKings, $5,000 for Zach Ertz with his scoring potential. Just tight end 13 by points, 15 on FanDuel, but 9th and 11th by points per dollar. He's on the board, and as a $5,000 tight end, he just kind of fit into a lineup that I was building earlier that just came together around that spot. So I like that a lot. Olamide Zacchaeus, Luke McCaffrey, Diami Brown. Just a little bit of a battle between these three guys for targeting, for opportunities. 1 touchdown between the three. That went to Diami, who operates on the deepest average depth of target. The other guys, 3.2 targets a game going to OZ, just 1.4 per game going to Luke McCaffrey. Moderate average depth of target, limited output, and no touchdowns so far. Doesn't really put anybody on the board outside of just a dart throw in a +2 type situation. And if you're going to that, I greatly prefer Daniels, McLaurin, Brown. Daniels, Brown, Ertz is fine. If you're picking between these guys, though, probably is just safest to go with Zacchaeus and take the volume. Not that it's a lot of volume, but it's more than the other guys. You might see a little bit of Chris Rodriguez. I threw him into the mix just as a third running back option. But again, I do prefer McNichols as between those two. And I would prefer McNichols if I thought he was going to see equal touches to Eckler, but he's not. Terry McLaurin with, I think with a bullet as your top option for a 100-yard day here. You could throw Najee in that, though. Not crazy to think that Najee will succeed that same way. 2 games to go. Power's never, ever going to play Wemby again. It feels like a mistake. Just a hunch. San Fran, you got to see what you get as far as the health. It seems like McCaffrey's trending toward playing. If he does, he's one of the top overall options on the slate. One of the best players in all of football. This is a game with a 50.5 point total. They're favored by 6.5 on the road in Tampa Bay. He ranks as RB4 across DraftKings, 4th by points, but 9th by points per dollar as a super expensive $9,400 piece on FanDuel. It's Christian McCaffrey. I don't think I have to sell him all that hard. Last season, 272 carries for 1,459 yards and 14 rushing touchdowns in 16 games, and added 67 catches for 564 more yards and 7 touchdowns. So that's 2,000 yards from scrimmage and 21 touchdowns last year. So he's good. Brock Purdy projects out pretty well. Always a little bit better when he's got the superstars in play. McCaffrey, Debo, George Kittle. Now he's got Juwan Jennings instead of Brandon Ayuk in that second receiver spot. But weapons galore for this quarterback. He's also just been pretty decent. Throwing the ball 30 times a game, completing 64% of his attempts for more than 260 yards a game. 10 touchdown passes against 7 interceptions. With full health with his skill players, that'll improve. 9.2 yard average depth of intended air yards per attempt is significant as far as the downfield opportunities go. 8.7 completed yards per pass attempt. He's run the ball in 3 times, running just 5.3 times a game, but able to punch the ball in when they need him to. 6 touchdowns on the board for George Kittle. At the tight end position, he's been like the consistent guy who's putting the ball into the end zone, doing it on 7 targets a game and 8.2 yard ADOT. Kittle is one of the top receiving tight ends in the sport still. doesn't necessarily get the respect that he deserves, I don't think, as far as that role. And especially this year, I feel like he should be with tight end down in general, getting a lot more buzz for the production he's had at the position. Debo, 8.8 yard ADOT, 1 receiving touchdown on the season, 1 rushing touchdown on the season. A little bit limited by some of the injuries so far. But we all know that Debo's got Slate bending ability when he's out, when he's healthy and active, and he sees carries in the ground. He sees opportunities galore through the air. Jennings is the real interesting one. 6 targets a game over the course of the season, catching 4.2 of them on an 11.3 yard average depth of target. He's turned in 3 touchdowns already. Those 3 touchdowns all came in one big week. If you remember, back in week 3 against LA, picked up 11 catches on 12 targets, 175 yards and 3 touchdowns. Followed that one up with 3 for 6 for 88 yards. Pretty decent game there. Had 5 catches for 64 back in week 1 when this team was more complete. So again, with the presumption that he's going to step into that Ayuk role, I really like the receiver as, your 4th most popular skill player on this team. If people are going to Pearsall over him, I will take the Jennings shares all day. That's why I've got it projected this way. I wouldn't necessarily argue with somebody that said that Pearsall's going to bite into Jennings' upside or have it projected more evenly. Last 2 games with Jennings out, Pearsall picked up 5 and 4 targets in his first 2 games of the season. Caught 3 for 21, caught 4 for 38. They drafted the kid highly. They're going to want to see what they've got. So I get it. He's going to be involved too. I think he's just a good super depth option who's probably like 2 or 3 targets. I think Jennings is a real option who is going to see 5 or 6 targets, going to see the potential to put up scoring events. Ranks as 24-18 on DraftKings, 23-12 on FanDuel. A lot of interest in this value square on FanDuel. Assuming mostly full health for Christian McCaffrey, I think we're relegated to just backup shares for Jordan Mason, unfortunately. The explosive player, the end is finally here. He's turned back into a pumpkin and so on and so forth. Same thing, downstream impact for Isaac Orendo with health at receiver. Same thing downstream for Ronnie Bell's, Jacob Cowings of the world. Kyle Juszczyk should see a couple of opportunities in the passing game each, or maybe not a couple each week, but one here and there going forward weekly. That's how they use him. He's just, kind of a gadget and a blocker for them. Any given slate, if you want to mix 1 or 2 in, if you're building 20 San Francisco stacks, that's fine. But you don't want to get carried away with that on non-showdown slates. Limited pass catchers on the Tampa Bay side. You can see Cade Otton is ranking out pretty well on a beefy projection given the absence of their top 2 receivers. You've got Jalen McMillan questionable. I've got him projected in. Some other sites are going a different direction. We'll see whether he plays. If he does, even with a mid-board type projection, he's just wide receiver 37, 39, 42, 51 across sites. Trey Palmer not ranking much better. Sterling Shepard not ranking any better. One of those guys will get a nudge. Right now I've just got it kind of splitting the baby between the 3. If McMillan doesn't play, then Palmer and Shepard both get a little bit of an uptick. And then you'll see a little bit go to Raheem Jarrett down the board. Right now it's just kind of murky. I think any of those guys paired with Baker just on the quality of Baker makes it a little interesting. And with the volume with which this team throws the ball in a game where they're going to be playing from behind with a 50.5 point total, there's reasons to believe that a Baker, Otton, Shepard could play. But you're talking about more thin options than this team normally would be presenting with full health in the top wide receivers. Which, again, is a shame because this would be a great DFS game if those 2 guys were healthy. On the ground, Rashad White, Bucky Irving. Bucky's been pushing White all season. Carried the ball 7 times for 24 yards, caught 3 passes for 10 last week. Week before, 9 carries, 44 yards, and 7 catches for 40 yards. White, last week, 3 carries, 19 yards, and a touchdown, 3 catches, 16 yards. So it was basically the same touches on twice as many snaps. And that's been the pattern over the last couple of games. Both of these guys have a little scoring upside. Bucky is the more talented running back. White, even last year when he was good and we were using him for DFS, was almost exclusively carried by volume. You can see the difference between the two in their yards per attempt. 5.0 for Bucky, 3.9 per attempt for Rachaad White. Bucky's eclipsed him now in touches in carries per game. White's still seeing more targets per game, but Bucky does have an appreciable number of targets. It's just almost down to a true split between the two now. So you're just playing the guessing game on who scores. 3 rushing touchdowns for Irving. 4 combined touchdowns so far for White. Down the board from that, really nothing. And again, Raheem Jarrett would get more involved in the absence of McMillan. Ryan Miller up to 3 targets a game, does have a touchdown on the board this year. I threw him into the mix the other day on, was that a showdown slate? I want to say that was a showdown slate. He had been targeted 5 times in week 8 against Atlanta, caught 3 of them for just 19 yards. But I didn't do a show for that one, I think. I just built the lineup, I think is what it was. Regardless, what I'm trying to say is I had him in the showdown slate for that touchdown last week, but it came on 1 catch for 1 yard and a touchdown on 3 targets. Even in showdown, that didn't pay. Granted, that lineup was flawed in other ways. But you really do need more than one 1-yard touchdown catch, even from super value guys at no ownership. There's got to be a little bit beyond that. So you're looking at maybe 3 targets here. He could have that touchdown receiving ability, but you really do want to get like the 2 catches on 3 targets for 31 yards and a touchdown. That would pay. Your top bonus guy comes from the San Francisco 49ers and depends entirely on who's healthy. I don't think there is one on Tampa Bay, but it could be any of 3 or 4 different guys on San Francisco. Right now, I'll just give it to Christian McCaffrey because it's his first game of the year. Last game up, Tennessee and the Chargers. Defensive battle, ugly game to leave for last, 39-point total. 7.5 point spread favoring the Chargers. Tennessee in town, bringing a decent defense to bear. They rank first against the pass with just 6 yards allowed per pass attempt on the season. They rank 13th against the run with 4.4 yards allowed per rush attempt. But they've allowed 26.6 points per game and 3 touchdowns per game, which is really annoying. They're the definition of a break, don't bend defense. So it's difficult to say that they're good. They're just decent at like bottling things up. Limited in terms of 7.23% sack rate, ranks 14th. A 1.30% interception rate ranks them just 26th. So there's nothing really to get excited about in this defense. And it's just kind of misleading that they are just limiting yardage, but allowing scoring. I think that leads to a little bit of potential on the Chargers side. We've got Justin Herbert, a reasonable enough quarterback who jumps up to QB6 by points per dollar on DraftKings. Ladd McConkey is an obvious value square on both sites. Not only does he rank 10th just in raw scoring at a pretty big projection, 6th by points per dollar on DraftKings, 3rd by points per dollar on the FanDuel slate because he is cheap for the opportunity. So I like the upside there. I think as a standalone receiver, he makes a lot of sense. If you're going to this team as a stack, I don't know that I really would recommend that. I don't love a fairly low-end team in terms of like their offensive abilities when they're favored by this much in a total that doesn't crack 40. The Chargers are allowing, they're good defensively. They're allowing just 12.6 points per game and 1.3 touchdowns per game. But their offense is scoring just 19.9 and 2 touchdowns per game. So it's not like this is a runaway freight train of a team that you have to go stack because they're playing a team that allows scoring. And with the idea that this team does bottle up the yardage, now I'm losing potential touchdowns and potential yardage for some of these plays. So to stack play on play on play from a game environment like that doesn't really seem all that good an idea to me. But I definitely think that McConkey on his own, McConkey and Herbert as a thin stack, J.K. Dobbins on his own, those are interesting plays. Chargers defense, perfectly fine. Everybody else, more of a dart throw. Dobbins in particular, 72, 73 across sites. He's RB 9 and 11 by points per dollar. Running back 10 and 4. I guess I do abbreviate RB all the time. 10 and 4. Very interesting points per dollar mark on FanDuel. Picking up 19 potential touches a game. That works for me. 4.9 yards per attempt on the ground. 77.5 yards per game. 6 rushing touchdowns on the season. He's catching 2.5 balls a game. Hasn't put one in the end zone through the passing attack, gaining just 4.3 yards per target on a negative 0.7 yard ADOT. Means just catching the ball behind the line of scrimmage, gaining a few yards, and not making any big plays so far. But has that potential. The right play call, the right hole opens up, and you're gone with this running back. So I like the upside in the passing game and the involvement on those targets to give him the direct correlation that we need to consider him for. Even if it's a thin, like Herbert plus Dobbins is a weird way to attack this one, but it's not completely off the board. I just really like the upside that McConkey's given us in a points per dollar sense, particularly on FanDuel, but really on both. McConkey, 5 catches for 64 on 7 targets last week, 6 for 111 and 2 touchdowns in week 8 on 6 targets. 5 of 7 for 46. Has seen increased volume over the last 4 or 5 games. Definitely a good receiver for the money. A pretty high-end guy. Quentin Johnston, a little bit lower end than that, but cheap. 49, 59 across sites. Wide receiver 32, 37, 34, 35. Definitely some downfield ability. Last time out, 118 yards and a touchdown on 4 catches on over 5 targets. Solid average depth of target at 11 yards. 4 touchdowns on the season is not nothing. It ties McConkey for the team lead. You get a 13-yard ADOT for Josh Palmer. Just 1 touchdown so far for him. He caught 2 passes. The touchdown came last week. 2 of 4 for 63 yards and a score. If you're putting up 63 yards on just 2 catches, you've got some big playability. The week before, 2 catches for 72. One of those was a 40-yard play and a 20-yard play. There's a lot of ability there in Josh Palmer. It's just a little bit more thin on the targeting. But I guess maybe if you do make the decision to stretch this team out a little bit, the Herbert, McConkey, and then one of these 2 is perfectly viable. Will Dissly at the tight end spot, he is very cheap. 3,100 on DraftKings pushes him up to tight end 8 by points per dollar. But the output's been a little bit thin. We're talking about 3.5 catches on 4.5 targets, 6.7 yards per target, under 10% of the team's air yards. No touchdown yet on this season for Dissly. Talented enough guy. Peaked at 8 catches, 81 yards in week 7 on 11 targets. If you get anything approaching that volume, that's a home run of a value play. Honestly, even if he doesn't get in the end zone at that price, on DraftKings, that's probably fine if you happen to get that game. Last week he caught 2 of 3 for 9 yards. But there's, a few, every other game he's at least in double digits for yardage. Handful of catches, targets. Vidal, Hurst, you're talking about just some second stringers there. Maybe DJ Shark gets on the field. Maybe he doesn't. I keep putting him in initial projections and taking him out when he doesn't play. Would be nothing more than a dart throw. Basically, everything on the Tennessee side is at best a dart throw. There is big playability and tons of talent still for Calvin Ridley. Definitely knows how to get up and down the field and score the ball. 1 touchdown on the season through the air. 1 on the ground. A 14.9 yard ADOT. Remember what I was saying about Terry McLaurin in the 40s. Massive share of the air yards at 53.81%. No Hopkins to worry about here anymore. He is just easily, on his own, the standalone top receiver on this team. That amounted to 10 catches for 143 yards in week 8 against Detroit, but he failed to score. Week 9, he caught 5 balls on 8 targets for 73 yards. Those were his 2 best games of the season. But again, we are dealing with just 1 touchdown, and we're dealing with Will Levis throwing the ball. which is the most limiting factor at play here. Levis has completed 66% of 25 pass attempts per game for just 139 yards. 5 touchdowns against 7 interceptions is a terrible ratio, and 5.6 yards per pass attempt. There are people in chat who could do just as well. That also limits Okonkwo, who is already just kind of a moderate talent at tight end. He's got 1 touchdown on the season, 6.1 yards per target on 3.3 targets a game. You've got Tyler Boyd here for a little bit of receiver depth with a little bit more to do now, stepping up as with Hopkins out of town. But another guy, 3.8 targets a game, 7.4 yard average depth of target. You're talking about like a middle of the field type receiver, moderate upside for big plays. Nick Westbrook-Ikini is at least interesting because they've thrown him 4 touchdown passes this season. Basically, every single one of them is frustrating because he only draws 2 targets a game. So they're always like, God damn it, that's where the touchdown went. But that does make him at least a big field, large field tournament dart play at the absolute worst. Just not a big talent, and again, not really dealing with much of a quarterback throwing him the ball. Tony Pollard's been effective. He's carrying the ball 17.8 times a game. He's targeted 4 times in the passing game, so that gives us 21.8 potential touches per game, right where we want to be volume-wise. Gaining 4.4 yards per target in the pass, or per touch in the pass, in the rushing attack. 4.2 yards per target. My brain's skipping ahead. In the passing attack. Hasn't scored in the air, just 3 touchdowns on the ground. The touchdowns have been a little bit of the hiccup here, but that's the case for basically all of Tennessee. They're just not a high-scoring team. They're going up against again, defense that's been pretty good this year, though. 6.4 yards per pass attempt allowed, ranks 4th. 4.6 yards per rush attempt, though, 22nd rank. Should potentially feed a little bit of upside for Pollard. In terms, where'd they go? In terms of the scoring, they're allowing just 0.4 rushing touchdowns per game, though. That ranks 1st in football. They're allowing 1.3 touchdowns overall per game. So while they're a little bit of bend in the yards per rush attempt, they're the opposite of their opponents in that they don't allow you to finish those drives off. Definitely a little bit more viable to score against them in the air, but that's just 0.9 passing touchdowns per game. Difficult team to score against. Again, 12.6 points per game. Not a world-beating list of opponents, but that's who they're facing this week. It's not like they've played all bad opponents, so they get a boost in their stats, and now they're going to get their comeuppance by playing a good team. They're playing Tennessee this week. That is a top-end defensive choice as far as DFS potential goes for a DST. And it's a potentially limiting factor for a mediocre at best Tennessee team. Dobbins is your top option as far as a bonus potential goes. The Chargers stack is definitely in play. 11th by points, 7th by points per dollar. 12th and 3rd on FanDuel is very interesting. A lot of points per dollar value in Dobbins. A ton in Ladd McConkey. But again, that does maybe suggest that just good individual play, and maybe we don't stack it like crazy. But there's definitely value there if you want to go to the stack. It's a cheap way to build. If you can grab a Justin Herbert +2 and keep it that cheap, then you're just piling really good skill players on top of your stack, and any points that you might sacrifice in the stack build get clawed back by the fact that you're grabbing the A.J. Browns of the world, the Saquons of the world, the other big-time touchdown scorers. Ridley Pollard as standalone plays perfectly fine on the other side. I don't know that we stack much Tennessee at all. 22-22 on FanDuel. Worst team on the board on an 11-game slate. 20 worst team on the board by points, but claw their way all the way up to 18th by points per dollar on DraftKings. Not a great option. Gang, that brings us to the end of the show. 2 hours and change. Not bad. We're getting through these a little faster. Fewer games on that one, though. If we had 4 more games to talk about, we'd be talking about another hour. But this was a good one. A lot of fun. A lot of work to do for me overnight. I'm going to write out the remaining 9 games on the slate. Again, if you're following along at home, if you're up all night tonight, reload Roto Scouts once a half hour, and you'll get a new team written up. Going to go into a little bit more detail for each player, but it's going to be a lot of, this type of content, talking about favorite plays, performance, current stats, all of that. May or may not open that up for a little bit for like 2 hours tomorrow morning for people to access just as a little promo. We'll see. I'll let you guys know, or maybe I won't let you know. Who cares? But yeah, definitely. Steven says this is your version of a YouTube short. So true. But yeah, I'll be working on that. Projections updates will be ongoing. Rankings updates will happen at least twice between now and lock, depending on how many changes we get. Going to keep an eye on that last basketball game for any changes. I'll keep that updated. Basketball tomorrow, hockey tomorrow, and obviously main slate football tomorrow. For under $1 for the cost of tomorrow, you can access all three sports, all three main slates, plus the showdown slate. And then your weekly plan for less than $7 when you buy it will carry through. If you buy it tomorrow morning, carry you through next week's football main slate. It gives you 2 football main slates, 7 NBA, 7 NHL main slates, 3 or 4 football showdown slates. So check it out. Rotoscouts.com, guys. I know that I'm talking to the regulars. I appreciate every single one of you. Slightly more appreciation, slightly more favoritism from me for those of you who have subscribed in the background, and I know who you are. I'm watching. I appreciate, even if it's just down to liking this video, hitting the subscribe button, even if it's just down to coming and hanging out with me, guys. You don't have to pay me for my time, but those of you who do, you absolutely rock. With that in mind, good luck out there. I'm going to go stop talking. Somebody go win something this weekend. We will see you on Monday for basketball. Adios.